Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was the quiet genius with a fierce protector? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Now, you're all almost done with middle school, so you have to start thinking about your futures. Bakugo Katsuki's feet rested on the top of his desk as he tuned out the meaningless rambling of their teacher. His red gaze glanced towards his childhood friend who was seated by a classroom window. Midoriya Izuku just sat there silently as his emerald orbs focused intensely on his small handheld device. Bakugo forgets what it was called, but it was something strange. Game Boy, was it? Either way, the device was pretty much an ancient collector's item for gamers nowadays since it was made during the pre-Quirk era. No one really cared that his friend was playing his games considering they held a bias when it came to those with powerful quirks versus weak ones. Bakugo always had to scare off some nosy students who crowded the nerd as they begged him to show his quirk. "Oh, who am I kidding? You all want to be heroes," their teacher exclaimed, the high school application forums being thrown into the air. The classrooms suddenly became loud with cheers as students began letting their quirks loose. The teacher at the front finding humor in it as he struggled to calm his students back down. The noise was staying way longer than Bakugo would have liked, and he was struggling not to explode at them, both literally and figuratively. That's right, the teacher thought out loud. Bakugo and Midoriya, you're both trying to get into UA, right? When Bakugo heard the harsh criticisms about Izuku's lack of being hero material, he finally had enough of the peanut gallery. He stood up, the legs of his chair screeching against the floor as he stomped a foot and let out some small explosions in his palms. "Then right we are. Just look at you extras thinking you can stand in our ring. Aizu and I are the only ones from this cruddy school who are gonna make it big." The blonde finally sat back down, ignoring the other students' protests about his rudeness and attitude. He only just glared at them with a TSK from his tongue. Midoriya could only sigh quietly at the commotion. That is how the rest of the day continued. Anyone who even looked towards Midoriya or Bakugo would have the aggressive blonde sending them a murderous glare. It was enough to keep up a tense atmosphere and intimidated students. Once the bell finally rang, everyone was quick to pack up and leave the classroom. Bakugo could only watch them with annoyance at how they act like big fish one moment only to have their tails between their legs from a few shouted words. No way they could become heroes if they couldn't even take some of his crude language. Villains were sure to say much worse. With a sigh, Bakugo took his time packing his things into his bag before walking up towards Midoriya, who still was focused on his game. The blonde gave his friend a few gentle nudges on his shoulder. "Oi nerd," bell rang. Bakugo waited patiently. Something that no one even thought he could do. "Okay." Midoriya finally responded with a soft voice. The Viridian-haired boy grabbed his backpack, which was a light teal and designed to look like a bunny. Bakugo noticed those same old video game and anime pins and keychains that were attached to it. He waited until the shorter male finished packing his things, only unpausing his game once he was ready to go. "All right, let's go, nerd." Bakugo stuffed his hands in his pockets as he walked away. Despite Midoriya's gaze staring solely at his screen, he managed to follow Bakugo with ease. The pair eventually found themselves walking through an underpass with a calming silence. Bakugo eventually took a deep breath. "Nerd. How's it going at home?" "Could be better, I guess," Midoriya replied. Bakugo could only huff at his friend's answer. "Did the BSRD do anything to you today?" "Caution. I'm alright. It was only some harsh shoves. Mainly just verbal so far." The spiky-haired blonde pinched the bridge of his nose with a sigh. "Listen here, I'm going to be taking you to a quick trip at the convenience store to get you something to eat before you go back to the Esperum donor. Got it?" "No" isn't an answer either. All Midoriya did was nod. Suddenly, he paused and removed his gaze from his screen. Bakugo was quick to notice the lack of steps behind him. "Nerd?" he questioned as he turned around. He watched as his friend seemed to be thinking hard about something. "What's wrong?" That's when he heard an unnatural slushing sound from the manhole nearby. Bakugo slowly backed up closer to Midoriya in a protective manner. Both of their eyes were focused on the manhole as their bodies tensed. The sewer top blasted into the air as a large mass of green sludge crawled its way out of the underground. It seemed frantic until it spotted the pair a small distance from him. The two teens could practically feel the villain's glee. Perfect, just perfect. 2 invisibility cloaks just when I need one. Just stay right there. Bakugo was quick to grasp his friend's hand as he dashed as fast he could from the villain that began to charge at them. Keikachin dash. Midoriya tried to warn before the slime took hold of him. Bakugo turned around, his heels trying to dig into the pavement as he struggled to pull his friend free. Damn it. Leave us the F alone, you slimy but villain. He really wished he could use his quirk, but there was a high chance of Midoriya getting hurt from his explosions and he didn't want to risk it. The nerd already had too many burns to deal with. The slime villain glared at the blonde teen. I'm on a time limit here, kid. I need to get away before he finds me. If you want your friends so badly, then I'll just take you too. I just need one of you alive anyways. Bakugo struggled with all his might as he growled and set off small explosions to try and ward away the villain's grasp. He was running out of breath though once the villain successfully blocked his airways. Midoriya and Bakugo were so caught up in their struggle that they didn't even recognize that someone else appeared at the scene. All the two heard as a shout of, "Texas Smash," before they felt a strong gust of wind pressure. Before they knew it, they were free from the sludge as their lungs were finally able to breathe again. Their world went dark. Midoriya faintly heard the raspy voice of his friend. It sounded like he was trying to hide the worry. Oi, nerd, get up. There was a small fit of coughing. Aizu, wake up, Diaminate. Are you trying to make me call the paramedics? Keikachin? Midoriya wasn't expecting the soreness in his throat. I guess that was to be expected though when a slime villain tries to suffocate you by directly going down your throat. Finally! Bakugo exclaimed with a relieved sigh. The blonde helped with getting the other to sit up. Listen, you won't believe who just saved us. Midoriya blinked as he tried to recover from his daze. Lady Palutina? He distantly heard Bakugo facepalm. Wano. None of that Icarus whatever it's called sheet. They both heard a deep voice called out to them with uncertainty. Are you boys alright? Going to be alright? Bakugo scared as Midoriya finally began to understand who was right next to them. Yeah, we'll be fine. The nerd just takes a bit. All Might could literally see as those emerald orbs gained clarity and seemed to be filled with stars. All Might? The man let out a deep laugh. Glad to see you back in the waking world, kid. Sorry about you both getting caught up in that villain attack. Normally mistakes like that don't happen with me, but I'm new to the area and I got a little excited on my day off. Midoriya may be obsessed with his video games and anime, but he does have a hero-loving side to him. It was mainly Bakugo who kept that flame alive as Midoriya grew up. He knows that his love for heroes would probably have faded away over time if it wasn't for his childhood friend. Well now, since you two seem to be fine, I must be off now. After all, hero work is never done. Right before he took off though, he paused at a soft voice exclaiming, "Wait." He turned his head to look at the green-haired teen. I'm sorry, young man, but I must be going. Midoriya seemed to pause before speaking again. No, I was just trying to say that you should keep a hold on the bottles you put the villain in. Those pockets of yours won't be able to keep the bottles secure considering how much force you jump with. All Might paused in his movements, his expression thoughtful, before removing the bottles containing the sludge villains so they were now securely in his hands. You raise a good point, young man. Thank you for your advice. Now, I must drop this villain off to the police. Thank you for your support. The pair then watched as All Might leaped into the air until he was out of their sight. They were quiet until Midoriya tilted his head with a sad expression. Oh, I forgot to ask him for an autograph. He watched with confusion though when Bakugo chuckled and pulled out on his school notebooks. The blonde opened it up to a blank page where All Might's signature was written. No need to worry about that, nerd. I also made sure he wrote a second one for ya in here so I can just tear it out and give it to you. Bakugo soon found his nose being tickled by green curls as Midoriya launched at him with a hug followed by a quiet, "Thank you." The two just sat on the ground for a bit, Bakugo playing with the curls on his friend's head. When about a minute passed, Bakugo finally felt his friend's hug loosen in strength. All right, nerd. You're welcome. Now, come on, I promise to get you some food. Kachin, will you hold on to that signature with my other stuff? 'Cause, Midoriya pouted slightly as Bakugo ruffled his hair. Yeah, I got you covered. That BST ain't getting his paws on any of your stuff. I'll add it to the safe. Now let's hurry it up. I don't want you to get hurt because I kept you out too late. Midoriya smiled as his fallen Game Boy was dusted off before being gently given back to him by Bakugo, who had retrieved it from the ground. They were quite the opposite pair, but they were going to become heroes together and nothing would stop this little dynamic of theirs. The rest of their afternoon together was mostly full of silence. Regardless, they found a strange comfort in each other's presence. Midoriya Izuku leaned against the entrance gate to the UA entrance exams. He ignored the strange and curious expressions of those who passed by him. Midoriya didn't really understand what there was to look at. He was just waiting for his friend. Was it the way he dressed, or did he have something on him? Maybe it was because he was the only one playing this heavily outdated DS? If that was the case, then they really would see him as strange if he decided to use his Game Boy today. Either way, it didn't really matter to him what they thought. He loves these games even if they long since passed their prime. Midoriya wore a simple white button-up shirt with a dark teal shirt line that had a thin and sloppily tied light teal bow hanging around the collar. Over it was his favorite hoodie that was a slightly lighter shade of dark teal compared to the shirt line, which appeared as a near black color from a distance. There were a couple black stripes on each sleeve and one near the bottom of the hoodie. One of his favorite parts to it was the hood that had little floppy cat ears with a black print of an 8-bit cat face. Bakugo had it made as a custom order for one of his birthdays and he has always taken the best care of it. Sure, Midoriya now had spares, but he would hate to have anything bad happen to it. He remembered the time when Bakugo accompanied him to go to a local dry cleaner and he had to take it off. Bakugo said he looked like a kicked puppy until he got it back. Almost a month later, the blonde met up with him during one of their free days and gave him a gift bag that had 3 more of them. He have cried like a lot. The rest were just slightly baggy pants that matched the dark teal of his shirt line and his red high-top sneakers. In fact, all of the clothes he wore were a bit loose and baggy because he just liked the comfort it brought to have slightly larger clothes. Oi, what are you doing just standing there? Midoriya took a few seconds until he finally looked up to see his friend. I was waiting for you. Bakugo just huffed. You didn't have to. We said we're gonna be heroes together, so I wanted to make sure both of us walked in together. Alright, I get it. Let's get going before we're late. Bakugo growled as he walked by. Midoriya's gaze returned to his screen as he followed the blonde with ease. Welcome listeners to the UA practical exam. Can I get a hey? Present Mike could barely hear a soft voice give a tiny hey somewhere in the crowd. Oh well, it was better than having complete silence. Meanwhile, Bakugo just face-bombed in his seat that was, fortunately, next to the gaming geek. He just hopes his friend won't get in trouble for having his DS thing. At least the nerd had the common sense to dim the screen to its lowest brightness before walking into the auditorium. As Present Mike began to explain the rules of the practical exam, Bakugo found himself feeling bored since it was pretty simple to understand. He couldn't find any pity for the idiots who actually had to pay attention to understand what they were doing. So he decided to just entertain himself by watching what Izuku was playing. Midoriya seemed to tell without looking that Bakugo was paying attention to his game and tried to make it as entertaining as possible. You can't go wrong with virtual dogs, right? He heard the blonde make a nearly silent chuckle as Midoriya made one of them do a silly trick. And the both of you there. Are you even paying attention? If you're here just to play games, then you should leave. The people sitting by the pair began to inch away from the sudden murderous aura. Bakugo's hands slammed onto the desk in front of him as he stood. Hey, a-hole, how about you get those sticks out of your butt? Don't you dare look down on us because we're smart enough to understand such simple FING rules. Leave Aizu out of this too. Those games of his actually help him unlike you. How about you stop being a judgmental motherfucker and stop calling people out when you don't even understand a DMN thing about them? When the agitated blonde sat back down, he turned his head and noticed Izuku was staring at him, those green orbs holding a tint of a disappointed parent. What? He was being an a-hole. They distantly acknowledged that present Mike was resuming the explanation after the sudden outburst. Midoriya just shrugged. I don't think that was necessary. The blonde just gave a huff as Midoriya sighed. It was going to be a long day. Initially, the blonde was pretty annoyed that the pair wouldn't be in the same battle center. It made sense though, and it wasn't entirely unexpected. Yue wasn't wrong to split people from the same school up, considering that the two would have ended up giving each other boosts by working together. After changing into their gym clothes, there was a small exchange of good luck and a don't get your butt killed before they parted ways. Midoriya internally felt a bit anxious though when he noticed a familiar tall teen with dark blue hair and glasses. He ended up pulling his tracksuit hoodie up to hide. He was thankful for not being stupid enough to bring his DS with him, since it would probably get broken and make that guy angry. The only thing he took from his bag before leaving for the bus was a keychain ball maze to play with. It wasn't much, but it was something to keep his mind busy. He hopes that even something like this won't set the tall teen off to go lecture him. As everyone waited outside the gates of the fake city, Midoriya took the time to do some extra stretching. He did some this morning before he left, but it was better to be safe than sorry. A part of him wondered if he was truly ready to use his quirk for actual combat. For the past 10 months, they've been training their bodies for this very moment. After all, it wouldn't be good to run into fights as a hero if you had skinny FING noodle stick arms, as Bakugo put it. Midoriya thinks that a large majority of why their training was such a success was due to Dagoba Beach. It was absolutely swamped with litter, but it was a perfect location to train with and without their quirks. The smell of the beach-turned junkyard took a bit to get used to, but they eventually decided to do something about it. Who knew that cleaning up years' worth of heavy junk would help buff you up? Then start. Present Mick's voice shouted with his quirk. The gates were opening, but everyone seemed to be staring at present Mike with confused or startled expressions. Midoriya had enough experience and knowledge to take the opportunity to get ahead. As he dashed into the opened entryway, he distantly heard Mike explaining to the other examinees about there being no countdowns in a real battle. The sudden thudding footsteps of the rushing crowd behind him was lost to the heartbeats that filled his head. With a long exhale, he charged towards his first robot. Midoriya was swift to dodge the three-pointer's attempts to attack him as he ran by into close proximity. As he ran past it, his hand tagged it and the machine instantly froze. Midoriya stayed close enough near it to try and send the message to others not to destroy it, but he didn't stay too close that he could get hurt. Suddenly, the three-pointer seemed to ignore all the contestants and began attacking other robots. Midoriya's eyes could be seen glowing an electric green as he seemed to control the three-pointer like a puppeteer. The teen continued to keep repeating the process, his points growing ever so quickly. A controlled robot bit the dust? Not a problem. 3 or 4 more were already captured by Midoriya's quirk. The teen did feel the temptation to go all out though. He could do so much more if he didn't restrict himself to physically touching the machines to take control, but he didn't want to overdo it. Plus, he would probably be stealing the chance of an examinee who had potential. He didn't want to hog all of the points and he didn't want to accidentally hurt himself with quirk exhaustion either. By the time the teen decided to stop gathering points, he already forgot how many he actually gained. It was hard not to get lost in the freedom of using your quirk that had been mainly forced to be dormant for years. The last number he could recall counting before getting caught up in the fun was around 90 points. Midoriya hummed to himself in thought. That should be enough, right? He didn't really have much else to do, so he decided to jog around and see if anyone needed help. The people he aided or rescued had quite interesting quirks, but one that truly stood out to him was the examinee with a brainwashing quirk. It certainly was an experience to be brainwashed. Yet, he was glad his assistance brought some semblance of a smile to the purple-haired teen's face afterward. Midoriya could tell the guy needed sleep. Maybe he could give lessons? Then again, Kachin always did tell him his ability to sleep was unnatural, and possibly part of his quirk. Well, a few minutes had passed when the ground suddenly began to shake. From the distance, Midoriya could see the head of a giant robot whose robotic claws were collapsing buildings left and right. Examinees were shouting as they ran as far away from it as they could. He would have joined them if it wasn't for the worry that latched itself onto him. What if there were people who were left behind or trapped? What if someone was too slow or got injured? Midoriya had to make sure there was no one caught in the chaos the zero-pointer brought as he swiftly made his way closer. If he ended up getting hurt, Midoriya could only hope Kacchan won't be angry. Well, at least not too angry. Midoriya had to cover his face a few times due to the amount of dust and debris that floated in the air. Just as he suspected, there were some stray examinees who needed help, and he was glad to guide them back towards the entrance. He knew that the zero-pointer was an obstacle meant to be avoided, but this was insane. The scale of its printed image on the papers did it absolutely no justice. Just as he thought he cleared the way, his ears just barely picked out a small cry for help. His feet turned as he ran back to find whoever was in need. Out of all things Midoriya was expecting, he was not expecting to see a girl about to be crushed to death. Yue certainly wouldn't let it go this far, right? Either way, Midoriya couldn't just stand there and rely on the robot being stopped, wherever its controls were, because this was a hero school exam. He had to act even if it was pointless. As he ran over, he was able to get a clearer view of what he was working with. The girl had a leg trapped under a slab of concrete, likely from one of the buildings. Besides your leg, are you injured anywhere else? Midoriya didn't even realize the change in his voice. His voice had always been soft, but for once in many years, it wasn't that soft-spoken volume and tone he always used that made him sound like he was always tired. His voice was gentle, clear, and slightly raised. It was certainly not one like Bakugo's, but one that displayed a hidden strength behind it. All it needed was a shove in the right direction to unlock, much like the circumstances he finds himself in now. The short-haired brunette looked up at him, her body full of anxiety. I don't think so. Quirk. A Z0 gravity. I can get rid of the gravity of objects WH, which makes them float as a result. Midoriya nodded as he took the information in. Can you still use your quirk? The girl nodded slightly. I have a little bit left in me, but I think the debris is too heavy. I have a weight limit with what I can nullify. Narrowed emerald eyes gazed back up at the zero-pointer. Midoriya was glad he didn't go all out earlier. He turned to the girl as he said, just stay here and relax, I'll take care of the rest. Before she could protest, the girl could only watch as the teen charged towards the incoming robot. Midoriya was sure he could do this. He knows he never tried anything of this scale before, but he knows his quirk is strong with an incredible range. He wasn't entirely sure if there would be much of a difference from how many smaller machines he could control versus one gigantic one. Either way, the girl couldn't pull herself out, he couldn't lift that rumble, and this was the only thing he was sure he could do to stop, or at least stall, the machine. The teen ran to the side of it to avoid being run over by its huge wheels before firmly placing both his hands on its metal plating. Within an instant, his eyes went an electric green, his skin slightly glowing the same color as a ginormous bubble seemed to encase the entirety of the zero-pointer. To those watching, they all saw some electric green pulse, or what looked like a wave, of energy that formed some sort of force field around the giant machine before fading away. When people could finally see the zero-pointer again, it was still and its red lenses that served as its eyes went dark. The brunette who was stuck under the debris did her best to try and check on the teen to see if he was okay. Midoriya was still in the same position except his breathing came out heavily, his chest breathing in and out deeply. The only thing keeping his face from smacking into the robot was his stretched out hands that were holding his body up from collapsing. Okay, so maybe that was a little too much, and maybe the desire to keep the girl from getting killed had caused him to use a bit too much energy than he actually needed. Oh well, he couldn't do much about it now. Once he finally gained his bearings, he shakily pushed himself back up and walked back to the girl. Why, you okay? She seemed surprised. Yeah, I am, but what about you? He waved a hand in a dismissive gesture. I'll be fine. Midoriya began to notice that the examinees began to come back and were staring at him in awe. It was slightly unnerving to have so many impressed stares, but he guessed that his move must have looked pretty cool to them. It didn't take long for everyone to start winding down though as U.S. nurse, recovery girl, began to check on everyone. Midoriya was able to call for some assistance with getting the slab of rubble off the girl he saved. One of them was the purple-haired kid from earlier and the other was a spiky redhead who he pushed out of danger sometime during the exam. When Midoriya was given some gummies and given advice to rest, which he was an absolute queen at, he finally let himself sit down. "Hey, I'm Uraraka Ochiko. Thank you like so much for saving me back there." The brunette spoke up with an outstretched hand. Midoriya shyly shook her hand in response. "I'm Midoriya Izuku. I'm just glad you're okay, Uraraka-san." That tired and meek voice returned. He noticed that she seemed to look a bit guilty. "Sorry for wasting your time?" He tilted his head in confusion. "What do you mean?" "If you didn't have to go and save me, you could have gone and gained more points," she replied, one of her hands playing with the locks of her hair. Midoriya just shook his hand and gave her a small smile. "Hey, don't blame yourself for that. You didn't know it would happen. Besides, I'm pretty sure I had more than enough points to get in by the time the 0-pointer arrived." Eventually, the other two who helped rescue Uraraka afterward approached them. Midoriya finally learned that the redhead was named Kirishima and the purple-haired one was Shinso. The small group took some time to get to know each other, though the others weren't too bothered by Midoriya and Shinsu's lack of speaking until the green-haired teen suddenly sat up straight. "Hey man, everything okay?" Kirishima asked. Midoriya tried to not wince. "Oh, I forgot that I was supposed to meet a friend of mine after the exam was over." Shinso looked slightly apologetic. "Sorry. You should probably get going, right?" The green-haired teen nodded and with some exchanged goodbyes, Midoriya hurried to change clothes and meet up with Kachin at the exam entrance. "What the hell took you so long?" was the first words Midoriya heard when Kachin caught sight of him. "Sorry, I met up with some people and lost track of time." Bakugo seemed to pause at that. "Wait, what? Yeah, Midoriya seemed to think for a moment. "I think I just made friends." Midoriya soon found Bakugo shaking him by the shoulders. "You finally communicated and chatted with another human being? Did you at least get their numbers?" The blonde watched those emerald eyes blink slowly and a small whoops. He just face-bombed at his friend's forgetfulness. "Diminute Aizu." Apologies. Whatever, nerd. Let's just hope you see those extras again so you can befriend them properly." The two ended up walking towards their homes when Bakugo asked how Midoriya met the examinees. The gamer was glad to have his DS back in his grasp. Saved them from getting hurt. Midoriya then added as an afterthought, "I guess I also created a large EMP field to keep the 0-pointer from squashing the girl to death. That was a thing, I guess." There was an abrupt silence between them. What the F-? Midoriya had parted ways with Bakugo, the short teen handing the blonde anything of value to keep safe before parting ways. After all, he didn't want his stuff to be incinerated. It felt all too soon though when he found himself facing the door to his apartment. He took a deep breath and with a trained silence he entered the small apartment. As soon as he turned and closed the door, he hit a flinch as the sound of shattering glass rang. The left side of the wall by the door was slightly wet, broken glass shards directly below it on the floor. Midoriya Hisashi stood with a glare, smoke releasing with every breath. "Now, where the F were you?" Midoriya was silent as he easily ducked to avoid a bottle being thrown his way. "Answer me. Don't even try to lie either." "I was with Kachin." He could tell his father knew he was withholding the details. And Midoriya was hesitant to tell the truth. Normally, he would have no trouble telling his father and he would take his punishment with no objections. However, this wasn't something small like it usually is. Midoriya went against one of the man's top rules, and that was to stop trying to be a hero. He would always be punished for acting heroic or showing any interest in heroism if Hisashi found out. Yet, this was a huge step towards heroism and he most likely ensured his spot in UA. This wasn't some small transgression against Hisashi. What Midoriya did today might as well be taboo. He really wished he could play one of his games right now. The teen was soon snapping back into reality when he felt his short body be lifted into the air, the warmth of flesh locking around his neck like a collar that's too tight. Midoriya tried to keep himself from raising his hands to stop the suffocation. He knew that struggling would make no difference. "You went to the UA entrance exams, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Hisashi raised the arm that was holding up his child with cold silence. In a split second, he reeled it back and tossed Midoriya across the room. The grunt of pain that reached his ears just fueled his anger even more. Midoriya coughed as a hand rubbed at his throat, his body curling up after being tossed and slamming into a wall. His body ached and he hoped it was just bruising. He didn't want a repeat of when his ribs cracked. Midoriya was unable to recover fast enough once he heard his father's footsteps stomping towards him. When he tried to get up, he was immediately kicked back down. The kicks didn't stop as Midoriya tried to at least protect his face. He would have tried to protect his head, but after a bad incident where he got nervous that he lost his sight, he began dealing with any head injuries so he wouldn't have that happen again. Worthless brat. The man crouched down and yanked a fistful of the teen's hair, the kid's head being yanked upwards. "I told you not to take those stupid FING hero exams. What do you think you can even do?" Hisashi's grip stayed strong and Midoriya was quick enough to cover his face again just before Hisashi started slamming his head into the floor. "You FING disgrace. You just had to be born from that where of a mother and she couldn't even give me a boy for all the trouble that I didn't ask for. Then, you just had to be disillusioned that you could actually be a hero and then you refused to use that quirk of yours. It doesn't even matter if you have a good quirk now. Do you even realize what it felt like to be stared at when your quirk ended up being late? I had to live thinking I had a quirkless piece of shit." Midoriya almost let himself feel relieved once his father stopped trying to smash his face into the floorboards, the flame breather's steps becoming distant. The teen was right to not let himself become hopeful when another bottle was aimed at him. His instincts kicked in as he used his arms to desperately push himself away from the shattering bottle only to cry out when a second one directly broke on his exposed hands. He tricked him. Fin. The green-haired teen hissed as his hands bled crimson, some small shards sticking in his flesh. The small leftover of alcohol seeped into those wounds which only made it sting like hell. "You know what? You can attend that little hero school of yours?" Midoriya's head whipped up to look at Hisashi with eyes narrowed in suspicion. There had to be a catch. He could tell that Hisashi knew what he was thinking as if the man could read his mind. "At least you aren't too much of a dumb butt. Listen, if you want to stay at that hero school you're going to have to help with a job. Got it? J-job?" Midoriya's voice croaked. He slightly winced at the broken sound and slight ache in his throat. "Just a job. I'll only tell you the details unless you agree, and do note that I will not tolerate you backing out either. It would be a shame if something unfortunately happened to the Bakugas." Midoriya's eyes widened and his heart sped up. It has been such a long time since anyone had managed to invoke such a strong wave of fear. He didn't care how pathetic he looked as he crawled and dragged his body to Hisashi's feet. "Don't you dare, please don't." Hisashi's expression seemed to twist into that of a kind and loving father as he bent down and gently held his child's face with a hand. Midoriya suppressed a venomous glare at the unnatural sight. Now, son, nothing bad will ever have to happen if you just listen to me, all right? You swear you'll behave so you can be a hero and keep your friend and his family alive." Midoriya wanted to hesitate. He wanted to say, no. But he never could live with that decision. He was going to keep his and Kachin's dream alive. He couldn't let the blonde and his family suffer because of him. It was without question that Hisashi would make sure their last moments were full of suffering. Especially Kachin's. He swallowed and nodded in silent defeat. Hisashi let go of him, Midoriya's exhausted body collapsing against the wood flooring. "Good." He heard his father's voice say with mirth. "Now, all you'll be doing is simple, Izuku. You're just going to help me with my growing debt by putting your useless body to use. Think of it as a performance career, or maybe even like a rising star for those circuses." Hisashi then nudged his head towards the direction of Midoriya's room. Keep yourself in your room. I'll come to get you something to eat when it's dark. The older man made his way to the door as he grabbed his keys. While you stay in here, I'll be out to get you a work uniform for tonight. His eyes narrowed into a threatening glare at Midoriya. You know the drill by now. Don't even think of leaving your room once you're there, and keep away from any food. You should be thankful I stopped locking it from the outside because of your obedience. Midoriya stayed silent as he waited for his father to leave. After a few minutes of lying on the ground in pain did he deem it safe. The teen dragged himself to his room and took out his hidden medical kit. Once he finished patching what he could up, he crawled to the corner of his nearly empty room. His bed was nothing more than an old mattress and some bath towels. Midoriya Izuku laid there like a corpse, his heart and mind becoming numb for the rest of the day until the inevitable return of his father. Midoriya strolled down the halls of UA all while playing around with his tie. No matter what he did to try and make it look better, it just seemed to stay the same or become worse. He decided to just give up on it, the red necktie looking sloppy as it hung around his uniform collar. Once he stopped fiddling around with the tie, his fingers twitched as he quickly pulled out a Rubik's Cube to keep him busy. He brought an old PS Vita that sat securely in his backpack, but he didn't know if he'd be allowed to play his digital games as Aldera had let him. The teen had also packed his favorite hoodie in his bag to use as his version of a security blanket. He was a bit unsure if tying it around his waist was okay, so he just left it in his bag to avoid breaking UA's dress code. He worked hard to get here, he didn't want to screw it up somehow. As he searched for Class 1A, he felt a bit lonely. Kacchan had arrived earlier and Midoriya wasn't exactly ready at the time. He had texted the blonde to go on without him and that he'd meet him in class. His friend was reluctant, but left a "you better show up" nerd. Midoriya kind of wished he was with Kacchan since his friend would know where their class was. Mirio, wait up. Emirio, slow down dash. Midoriya felt himself falling onto the floor. He just laid there, blinking as he tried to comprehend what just happened. The green-haired teen was too tired for this. Sorry about that. I was just excited and wanted to see if there were any of our new first-year students wandering around. A cheerful voice exclaimed. When Midoriya decided to stop trying to take a nap on the floors of UA, he sat up. His emerald orbs looked upwards and he was met with three faces he had never seen. One had dark purple hair with an elvish-like appearance, another had long light blue hair, and the last had a face that reminded him of a cartoon character. As the sunny blonde offered his hand, Midoriya was quick to accept it as he was easily pulled up from the floor. Thanks. Hey, it's no problem. Besides, it was my fault that you got knocked over. Wait, I haven't even introduced myself. Midoriya could only blink slowly at the teen's energy. The name's Togata Mirio. I'm a third year in the heroics course. He then gestured behind him with his thumb. These are my friends and fellow classmates. The green-haired teen opened his mouth but was interrupted by the girl who seemed to not really know what personal space was. Oh, are you one of our new first years? What's your quirk? What can it do? Is it like anyone else we know? Is it an emitter? You don't seem to have any strange physical traits, so I assume it's not a mutant type. Oh, but if you aren't in the hero course, then don't worry about it. I'd love to know dash. The dark-haired one seemed to be gently pushing her away from Midoriya with an apologetic and embarrassed expression. Sorry about her, she asks a lot. He seemed like he was going to say more, but stayed silent. The poor guy seemed to lock up when he realized he spoke to a stranger. Midoriya felt a little bad about his senior's anxiety. This shy guy of ours is Amajiki Tamaki. I'm Heido Nijire. It's a pleasure to meet you. Midoriya could only nod in acknowledgement. Oh, let me guess. You're lost, aren't you? Heido questioned. She seemed to beam when Midoriya nodded. She seemed to do a little twirl out of excitement. Don't worry, we'd be happy to show you to your class. But I'm supposed to be in class 1th? The three seemed to pause in thought, Togata speaking up with an, we better get you there before Aizawa-sensei arrives. That certainly made Midoriya a bit nervous as the trio led him to his class. The three soon had to leave for their own homeroom after bringing him to an incredibly large door that was labeled as Class 1A. He was at least able to thank them before they had to hurry off. A part of him wondered if he'd ever see them again since they seemed to be a nice group. With a deep sigh, his hands slid the door open to an interesting sight. Bakugo's feet were up on his desk and that blue-haired glasses teen was moving like a robot as his voice spoke in a stern tone. He seemed to be scolding the blonde about the display of disrespect. Midoriya just walked to his seat as he made sure to make presence pretty much non-existent. Only Kachan's red gaze flickered to him for a split second before turning back to the strict kid in front of him. "Hey, it's you. The one who did that super manly force field thing to the zero-pointer." A familiar spiky redhead shouted with a wave. Midoriya could literally feel everyone's eyes snap towards him without even needing to look. His hand rose to return the teen's greeting with a timid wave of the hand. He pushed away that tiny part of his brain that felt uncomfortable with Kirishima's phrasing. The tall glasses teen then seemed to march up to Midoriya, the only warning being his friend's protective growl. Bakugo looked like he was ready to kill on Midoriya's command. "You're the one who ran back to save those people and that girl," he stated before bowing in front of the green-haired teen. "You are truly an exceptional student to have realized that there was something more to the exam. It is a pleasure to have you as a fellow classmate. Excuse me for my abruptness, I am Ida Tenya." This classmate was certainly something. When Ida seemed to be patiently waiting, Midoriya realized that he was probably supposed to say something. "Midoriya. Midoriya Izuku." Just then, another preppy voice had entered the class. At the door stood Uraraka, who seemed to quickly scan the classroom with her eyes until they stopped at Midoriya. "Hello. You're Midori." "Midoriya. Yeah. You're the one who saved me. Oh boy, I'm so glad to have someone in my class that I know." Kirishima then seemed to stand up a little. "Hey there. It's me, Kirishima." The girl seemed to lighten up even more at seeing another familiar person. Her eyes also caught sight of the familiar purple hair that belonged to Shinso. The tired-looking boy was watching it all from his seat in the back. Before any more greetings could be done though, a deep and exhausted voice seemed to fill the room. Everyone went silent. It took you all about 6 seconds to finally quiet down. The entire class's gaze stared at the door's entryway as a shaggy-looking man laid on the floor within a bright yellow sleeping bag. They just stared and blinked as the man brought a hand up to drink a juice pouch. "Who is this guy?" The older man soon unzipped himself from his cocoon as his eyes swept over them all. Midoriya couldn't help but feel like the man's gaze became a little more focused when his eyes moved in his direction. "If you're here just to make friends, then it is best that you leave. After all, this is the heroics course. Anyways, I'm Aizawa Shoyuda and I'm your homeroom teacher." The darkly dressed man then pulled out several UA gym uniforms. "Put these on and meet me outside." Midoriya tried to ignore the cries of his aching joints and injuries. He was really hoping he wouldn't have to do too much physical activity today. Midoriya Izuku never really had many scenarios where he truly struggled to make decisions. That didn't include his rating lists for his favorite games, game systems, and characters. Those were actually difficult issues. Do you even realize how hard it is to make a top 5 waifu and husbando list when you've played over hundreds of games and watched several animes? It's a serious issue. Yet, he found himself absolutely stumped as he gripped his gym uniform. His head turned at the sound of his blonde friend. "Oi nerd, what's wrong dash?" Bakugo actually paused and looked at where they were standing. There was a hallway in front of them, one side directing to the girls' locker room while the opposite direction led to the boys'. "Ah shit. Come on." Bakugo then took hold of his friend's arm, the green-haired teen stumbling before deciding to use his legs to follow. Midoriya glanced back at the direction of the girls' locker room as they walked the opposite way. "Nerd, you gonna be alright? You'll cover me when I change, right?" Midoriya spoke softly. There was a disbelieving huff. "Obviously." Bakugo hissed in a whisper. There was a tense silence between the two as they walked. "Oi, listen here. One day that dickwad of a father will be gone and you'll be able to be whoever and whatever you want to be. It doesn't really feel like it." Emerald Orbs looked on in sadness. I'll be punished if I even wear a pretty hair clip because it's too girly. Bakugo growled. I know, and it's stupid as hell. He has no right to make you a guy because he can't deal with a daughter. I don't even understand why he's all uptight and shit about it. Who cares, right? Midoriya's eyes began to hold a hint of doubt. What if he's right though? His gaze focused on the floor. What if I should just let him dash? Bakugo seemed to bristle before stopping to turn around and firmly grasp his friend's shoulders. Now, you listen to me and listen well, because anything your dad says is absolute shit. I don't care if you're female, male, or whatever the hell you want. For F's sake, you could go up to me and say you identify as a toaster and I wouldn't give a rat's butt. Sure, there will always be mental and physical limitations, but that's just how human bodies and bullshit genes work. We ain't perfect no matter how hard we try, but at least humanity has the ability to be strong in many different ways. That's just how life is. Don't you dare forget that, because I know your greatest weapon is that dorky brain of yours. Duh. Midoriya blinked. Did you just give me a pep talk? Bakugo let the short teen go as his arms crossed. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, nerd. Now let's go before we get in trouble. In the end, the green-haired teen was so grateful to his friend. When they arrived in the locker room, Bakugo opened the large door of an unused locker as a makeshift screen while the blonde kept himself standing where it wouldn't be able to cover Midoriya's body. The short teen really wished it didn't have to be this way as he finished getting dressed. Yet, as long as he was under his father, he would never be able to feel free. He could only hope that Kacchan was right. A Quirk apprehension test? Midoriya slightly covered his ears at the sudden chorus of shouts. Aizawa then began explaining the test that was much like their normal fitness tests but with the legal usage of their quirks. During the explanation, Midoriya had begun to drift off. It took a little bit for the other students to notice that he fell asleep standing up. Some of the more nervous students kept glancing back at the teen with worry, especially once Aizawa paused and just seemed to stare intensely at Midoriya's sleeping figure. They watched as the man removed the baseball for the ball throw from his pocket and lightly tossed it at Midoriya. Everyone expected the teen to get a good knock on the head and maybe see him be filled with embarrassment. It shocked everyone though when the ball was snatched out of the air when it was in Midoriya's range. A majority of the class just watched slack-jawed as the green-haired teen kept a grip on the ball while his other hand tried to rub the sleep out of his eyes. With a yawn, Midoriya began to look more awake and glanced around with visible confusion. Bakugo stood next to him, trying to hide his growing smile and urge to cackle at the class's expressions. Midoriya, now that you're up, get in the white circle and throw the ball as far as you can using your quirk. Anything goes as long as you stay within the circle. Aizawa finally instructed. The short teen made his way to the circle, staring at the ball in thought on how to use his quirk on it. Eventually, his eyes glowed that electric green as his arm lifted to create a 90-degree angle. He then gave one of the laziest and careless throws, if you call tilting his wrist down and letting it go as a throw, anyone has ever seen. Everyone was stunned silent though when the ball just vanished before it could hit the ground by the boy's feet. When Aizawa checked his tablet, all it gave was an infinity symbol. He raised a brow as he tried to understand what happened. Dude, what was that? A teen with yellow hair and a black streak exclaimed in disbelief. Midoriya just turned towards the teen with visible confusion. What do you mean? I just brought it to the nearest space satellite. Space satellite? At the 50-meter dash, Bakugo and Midoriya walked to their starting points. While Bakugo seemed to be in a position to use his explosions to propel himself, everyone watched as Midoriya just lazily stood there with no intention of a starting position. As the machine announced, "Start," Midoriya glowed before vanishing. They just watched as another flash of green appeared and Midoriya was back into existence. He took one little hop forward and made it past the finish line. 1.47 seconds. Bakugo soon arrived shortly after, followed by a 4.13 seconds. During the grip strength test, many marveled at the tall teen with multiple appendages. Then they all had to turn to Midoriya when an alarming beeping sound emitted from his machine. He wasn't even really gripping it, Yet the numbers seemed to be filling every number place with nothing but nines, as the machine was not programmed to go any higher. Midoriya just said he used his quirk to force the number values to go to their max. Aizawa knew quirks were allowed, but it was still supposed to be on physical grip strength. He sighed when he wrote the score as a side note, all while making Midoriya reset the machine to get a score without his quirk. When it was Midoriya's turn for the standing long jump, he ran swiftly, and as soon as he leaped into the air, he vanished in a flash, only to reappear in the air in front of one of the scoring machines. His momentum from running was still active and he went incredibly far. Midoriya was unsure if he could run and teleport himself to the finish line by traveling to the scoring device that stood on tripod legs. Aizawa let him do that for the distance run, but then required him to do it again without Midoriya doing his teleporting trick. Despite it all, the short teen still got some impressive scores. The rest of the tests continued rather normally. Besides the pink girl, Midoriya was right behind her in flexibility. During the side steps, he still got a pretty impressive score since he managed to use his quirk to give him a speed boost. Though, he didn't go too fast since he didn't want to accidentally launch himself to the side. The sit-ups were the worst part in his opinion. He definitely wasn't as scrawny thanks to him and Kachin training, but he wasn't the best at it. His score was a little above average. As Aizawa watched his students work to do their best, especially with his threat of expulsion, he noticed how Midoriya seemed to move his body as if he was feeling pain. The hero will admit that lesser-trained eyes wouldn't really notice it, but the kid seemed to be getting worse with each test. His eyes narrowed in thought as he remembered the kid's files that Nizu copied for him. There was something wrong in his files. Normally, people wouldn't bat an eye at it considering how normal it seems, but I've been working this job for a very long time. My instincts are rarely wrong when it comes down to this field. Aizawa, I recommend that you keep an eye on the boy. I am trusting my quirk and instincts on this. Aizawa sighed as he rubbed his temples with his free hand. He was too old and tired for this. When all was said and done, Midoriya managed to score first while Bakugo scored fourth. The green-haired teen noticed how his friend's eyes seemed to narrow in deep thought at the names Yaoyorozu and Todoroki. There were definitely going to be future rivalries sometime soon. As Aizawa dismissed the class, he called out for Midoriya to wait. Bakugo seemed to refuse in leaving his friend alone but eventually gave in at Midoriya's stare. The short teen expected to be told something bad, but he was surprised when his teacher gave him a slip. Midoriya, go visit Recovery Girl. I hope you can take better care of yourself in the future. Green Eyes watched as his teacher walked away. As he ran to meet up with Kachin, it took some time and many hushed questions to calm the blonde down when he learned that Midoriya was hurt the whole time. You dumb butt. If you're hurt, then that's what doctors and nurses are for. Good old Kachin. Class 1A waited in silence for their next teacher. Many, if not all, would admit that the first half of the school day was quite boring and average. It really made UA feel like your average school. However, it was the second half that truly made UA shine. The rest of the afternoon would be full of Foundation Hero Studies class until the end of the day. Some classmates seemed to be containing their energy and excitement to do some hero training. Though it was pretty interesting, Midoriya was just glad he had permission to have his hoodie and game system. The only condition for his video games was that he must be able to keep up in class and pay attention. If he failed to do that even once, then he would be required to not use his portable gaming devices during class. The only exception would be lunchtime, and he would still have to make sure he ate instead of gaming for the entire lunch period. Midoriya thought it was a pretty good deal. He always had no issues multitasking. His favorite hoodie stayed tied around his waist as the nearly silent clicking of the system's buttons filled the classroom. A few gave him curious glances, while a few wanted to just watch him play. Midoriya wondered if they were disappointed that their seats were too far from him. The only warning anyone got of someone approaching their classroom was the sound of heavy and loud footsteps. The door then slammed open as the number 1 hero threw himself into the room. Coming through the door like a normal person. Many students jumped in surprise and began chatting with excitement at the fact that the symbol of peace was going to be their teacher. Even though Midoriya and Bakugo already met the man in person, they both still looked up in awe. Alright, you bunch of newbies, who is ready for some battle trials? he exclaimed with a bright smile. Practically everyone's eyes lit up at finally getting some action. Bakugo letting out a hell yes. The large hero pulled out a remote, a single press causing the wall near the teacher's podium to open up. Everyone watched as the hidden racks held silver briefcases with painted numbers on them. Listen up. If you're all going to be acting like heroes, then you gotta look the part. Your costume application forms have already been reviewed and accepted. Please grab the case with your student number and meet me outside at ground beta. Midoriya was hidden away from view and he tried his best to look at his appearance once he finished getting dressed. He tapped Bakugo's arm and the blonde glanced back with a nod before moving away. Midoriya made sure to face his body away from everyone else as he focused playing his game in order to give the others some privacy. You ready? The green-haired teen took a moment to save his game before shutting the device off. Yeah. Before the blonde could turn to leave, Midoriya reached a hand out to tap him. Hey, do you think my costume is nice? I'm not the best at this kind of stuff. Bakugo actually never really got to see the nerd's costume design. He remembered his shorter friend saying he wanted it to be a surprise. When he actually took a real look at what his friend wore, he felt like he was looking at a strange DLC costume of that chick who explored tombs and constantly was in dangerous situations. He was kind of glad that he remembered when that nerd introduced him to that game, or else he wouldn't understand the reference. Midoriya wore a short-sleeved, white button-up with that sloppy light teal bow around the collar. It had a pair of BRST pockets and another pair of pockets near the waist of the shirt. The pockets had tiny zippers on them as well. The shirt was a little long and reached the beginning of the boy's thighs. If it got any longer, it could be seen as a very short dress shirt, literally. Over the shirt was a copy of Midoriya's favorite hoodie, except he could tell that it was a more resistant and tougher recreation. There were even black-colored shoulder pads and elbow pads attached. Of course, his friend left it unzipped. The boy's pants were that same dark teal as the ones he normally wore, but this time they were cargo pants that were loose enough to allow his friend flexibility. It was lined with tons of pockets with tiny zippers much like the pockets on his formal-looking shirt. The main difference that Bakugo saw was that the hoodie was much longer. In fact, if his friend had zipped it, it looked like a hoodie dress. It went down slightly past mid-thigh. Around his friend's body were many black-colored belts and storage compartments. There was one on each arm that was secured by a strap. The same was seen on the boy's left thigh, while the right seemed to have some sort of holster for a weapon. Around the waist was a utility belt, except there was a loop on each side that seemed ready to hold some sort of staff-like weapon. Midoriya also had a pair of black combat boots which Bakugo assumed were steel-toed with the possibility of other additions. The only other normal wear was the black fingerless gloves. There was a slight rectangular patch of fabric that seemed to rise on the back of his friend's hands, and the blonde wouldn't be surprised if there was a sheet of metal in there or something to protect the boy's hands. The only part that really got to him was the cat ear headphones with a teal visor and a hidden built-in mic. Bakugo just face-bombed. Why? Did you design it to look like a cat? The headphones were mainly black with light teal highlights. The blonde watched as Midoriya reached behind him and pulled up his cat hood. So the little ears were like sleeves for the cat ears of the headphones. That was definitely smart to consider since it would otherwise make wearing a hood rather difficult. Besides the hoodie and ridiculous head accessory, it definitely was close to one of the outfits that Tomb Adventuring character wore. I'm glad to see you got the reference. He heard the short teen say with his soft voice. I thought that she'd be a good example or at least a good base for a combat outfit, at least that's what I thought. I think you look fine, nerd. You'd be pretty plain without your geeky additions. Bakugo glanced away with slight embarrassment at giving an actual compliment that was swear-free. Anyways, besides the headset, you look like you ordered more support gear. So, what ya got? Midoriya reached into his case only to pull out, were those long pole-like Wii remotes? They looked a lot like the actual remotes except they were thinner and more rounded to help in giving a better grip. At the end of them were actual Wii remote straps. You've gotta be FING kidding me. Bakugo actually turned to see if anyone else was in the locker room, only to find it empty. Well, at least their other classmates are going to be surprised. The green-haired teen just secured them in the loops of his belt before looking up at Bakugo. I think they're pretty neat. Besides, They hurt pretty badly and can cause quite a lot of damage when you don't listen to the warnings to wear the straps. So, I might as well make them hurt even worse, right? Bakugo really couldn't disagree with that. He remembered setting up that nerd's Wii at his place, and he decided the whole wear the wrist strap thing was stupid. A few moments later, ended up putting too much force and ended up with a bruise, and his mom shouting about the loud bang against the wall. He snapped out of the painfully embarrassing memory when his friend then took out flipping Wii nunchucks. To be honest, they seemed more like dual sides with a long chain connecting them than just deadlier versions of the original device. There was a strong white cord that was quite long with 2 Wii nunchucks at each end. They were made a little bigger, and their curve near the control stick was slightly stretched out to make room for actual scythe blades. There were engravings of where the control sticks and buttons should be, since they would just be impractical to have. I originally wanted to keep the buttons for a wireless function, like, a button to make them like a taser, but it didn't work out in the end. Besides, it could be set off by accident since these are meant to be swung around. Even if there was a safety mode, it could be used against me and I'd have to make sure I have a good grip on the actual nunchucks. The idea wasn't really going to work. Midoriya then secured the nunchucks of death in the special pouch-like holster on his right thigh that was designed to carry them. I've got other stuff in these storage units, Midoriya started, but I'm planning to keep them a surprise. Bakugo could just nod. Of course, the nerd managed to bring his video games with him even outside the screens. He knocked off the teen's hood before doing his best to ruffle his friend's curly locks. He ignored the small squeak as he pulled away, the nerd quickly pulling his hood back up after adjusting his headgear. Come on. Everyone's probably outside already. Let's not keep All Might waiting. Fortunately, they weren't late as they caught up to their classmates who were still making their way to ground beta. When they got there, they watched as All Might seemed impressed by their hero costumes. Bakugo definitely saw some people second-guessing themselves when they saw the visible weapons Midoriya had on him. Eventually, All Might captured everyone's attention as he began to explain the battle trial, despite some interruptions. There will be teams of 2 who will be decided by a lottery. The same goes for the villain and hero roles. Heroes have to disarm the bomb by making contact with it or by capturing those on the villain team via capture tape or other means to restrain your opponents. The heroes will lose if they fail to retrieve the bomb within the time limit or the villains knock them out of the game. They will also be given capture tape. Ida's hand shot up. Isn't it impractical to assign teams using a lottery? Midoriya's head tilted slightly with visible confusion. But heroes have to work with other heroes all the time. When it comes to saving lives, can you really afford to be picky about who you have to be partnered with? Heroes have to improvise all the time. The glasses teen seemed to be a little ashamed at such an obvious explanation before apologizing and praising Midoriya yet again. All right now, time to draw teams. Midoriya wished he got paired with Bakugo, but I guess he couldn't win them all. The short teen casually walked towards his partner who seemed to be very nervous at the approach. Midoriya held out a hand. Hi, I'm Midoriya Izuku. The other seemed to shyly shake Midoriya's hand before letting go and making motions with his hands. Koda Koji. The boy signed. Imagine his surprise when Midoriya began signing with perfect ease. Are you hard of hearing? Koda shook his head. I just don't like talking a lot. The quiet boy seemed happy that someone else could understand him without forcing him to speak. It was a little surprising when Midoriya signed that he was similar. I don't really like talking either. I still do, but I've been told I'm very soft-spoken and that my voice is really quiet too. It sounds louder to me, so I guess I don't really notice. Since the two had some time to speak, Koda had the hope that he could get to know this classmate of his even more. When did you learn sign? I became selectively mute for some time years ago. Kachin made it his mission to make both of us learn sign. It also helps since his quirk has caused him to be slightly hard of hearing. Not too bad, but it could have been worse if it weren't for his quirk counselor. Kachin? Bakugo. Koda's eyes widened as he turned his head to look at the blonde who seemed to be arguing with Ida. He gave a small point in disbelief as he signed. Him? Midoriya nodded. Yes. Believe it or not. He's aggressive and difficult, but he does have good intentions. You start to understand the hidden care when you get to know him. He just watched as Koda nodded in understanding. Soon, All Might called to start the matches, his hands reaching into the box to decide the team matchups. We've got Team F as the villains and Team G as the heroes. Villains, make your way to the building and start planning. Heroes, you will be waiting outside the building to plan until the round starts. Everyone else, follow me to the observation room. Midoriya and Koda took a glance at Team G, which consisted of a boy with yellow hair with a black streak and a girl with earphone jacks hanging from her earlobes. As the pair made their way to where the fake bomb was waiting, Midoriya turned to his partner. Quirk? He signed. An e-voice. It lets me talk to animals, but I'm not seeing any. I don't think I'll be much help. Even if there were, they don't like loud noises. Battles can cause lots of noise. Midoriya's eyes looked at the saddened teen with kindness. Hey, that's fine. You're here to learn. You'll be able to learn how to do lots of things by the time we graduate. Don't give up hope even now. Koda looked at the short teen in surprise before breaking out into a happy smile. Midoriya was glad his words brightened the shy boy's mood. He watched as Koda asked the same thing. I call it VR. Since this building has electricity running through it and cameras, I'll be able to take control of it all. So I can keep you informed where the hero team is. I also have more offensive abilities, so I hope you don't mind me going on the front lines. Is it okay with you to stay here and guard? Emerald Eyes watched as Koda gave a thumbs up. Midoriya sent him a smile before both heard All Might's voice. Time's up. Time to start. Midoriya spoke quickly. Quick, bring the bomb as far away as you can. They can't fly and seem to be unable to scale the building. I'll go ahead and find them. With that, the two split up. Jiro paused, her jacks pausing in the air when she heard sudden movement. There was a pair of two different footsteps that were heading in the opposite direction from each other. The girl could very faintly hear a heartbeat making its way closer. Hear anything? Kaminari asked. They're above us and one is making their way down here. The other is going higher up. One of them is coming towards us? Well, what are we waiting for? I can just give him a good shock and boom. The blonde exclaimed with confidence. We shouldn't take it so light. I think it'll be fine. One looked nervous and the other had some weird extended version of Wii remotes. What could go wrong? Everything went wrong and Jiro wanted to zap Kaminari for his stupidity. The moron had gone and ran ahead while Jiro tried to keep up and stop him. Frustration was on her face as she tried to catch up to him, all while focusing on the sounds of their opponents. Then Kaminari got hit with a strange round object that opened and released a strongly woven net. The origin of the net was a two-toned ball with a white bottom and a teal top separated by a black stripe. In the light, the black crisscross design looked like a matte black. Once it confirmed that Kaminari was unable to escape, it let out an iconic ding. They both swore they heard a soft voice say, I caught a Pikachu. All the noise was taking Jiro time to try and sort through them. By the time she heard Midoriya, it was too late. As Kaminari finished his surprised shout, Midoriya had just appeared in a small flash of green in a nearby corner where one of the surveillance cameras were installed. The boy had run over and wrapped the blonde in the white capture tape. Before Kaminari realized he was captured and out of the game, he had let out a desperate burst of electricity. Jiro heard Midoriya let out a slight grunt of pain as she shielded her eyes from the brightness. By the time she could see again, Kaminari had a dopey expression and let out a wee and yay, followed by a voice crack. She let out a snort before she realized that Midoriya had moved. The last thing she heard as the air shifting and the sound of a heart pulsing behind her. Midoriya had swiftly knocked her out with a careful swing of one of his Wii remote batons. And demon did those Wii remotes hurt like hell. The villain team wins. Once Midoriya and Koda helped their classmates, they made their way back to the observation room. Midoriya noticed how people either stared at him in shock or eyed his visible weaponry with caution. He saw Bakugo cackle, many heads whipping over to the blonde as if the boy was crazy. Midoriya was just standing there confused. Even All Might was looking at him as if the man was struggling to think of something to say. What's wrong? The green-haired teen questioned as his head tilted slightly. All I did was play Pokemon Go and hit a friend during an intense match of Wii Sports. Aizawa-sensei came to class that day, his wording-making class 1A tensing for some sudden and strict test like he had put them through on their first day. Instead, it turned out to be choosing a class president and vice president. That's when the room began to break out into chaos. Midoriya tried his best to focus on his 3DS rather than the incredibly loud racket everyone was making. What was so great about being class president anyway? Eventually, Ida had risen up and recommended that they do a democratic vote. In the end, Midoriya ended up with the most votes followed by Ida. Hey, dude. Midoriya paused his game before looking up to see Kirishima giving him a smile and a thumb pointing to the board. You got chosen as our class president. The green-haired teen just blinks slowly. What? Ida's voice boomed within the classroom. It is an honor to work with you, Midoriya. I will do my best as vice president. Are you all done yet? Aizawa's groggy voice questioned. Midoriya sat at his shared lunch table with Kachin, Uraraka, and Ida. Kirishima said he'll sit with them next time since he seemed to be clicking with their other classmates and Shinso. He often persisted in eating by himself. He said something about not wanting to spend lunch in a group. One hand held his chopsticks as he ate his katsudon slowly. Meanwhile, he used his free hand to play his game, which really was meant to have two hands to play. Yet, the teen's friends just watched as Midoriya effortlessly played the little device with a single hand. Either way, they could tell the boy was feeling down. Midoriya-kun, I'm sure you'll be an excellent class president. It's not that bad, is it? Uraraka said. All she got was a shrug. Ida adjusted his glasses. Well, it is quite the responsibility. So it may be a bit daunting. However, if you had that many votes, then our class does see something in you worthy of being the class president. Bakugo took a bite of his deadly spicy curry before turning to them. The nerd may be skilled, but he doesn't really care for being the leader and sheet. He would rather stay in the background and be a motivational supporter. They all went quiet once they heard Midoriya finally speak. I'm not ungrateful that a lot of our classmates think so highly of me. I may have the skills, but I lack that personality a leader really should have. Besides, doesn't being the class president also mean I have to deal with more paperwork? I don't think that I have the free time to focus on that as well. There was a small silence as they took in his words. Uraraka was the one to speak up. Then, don't think about it like that. Everyone looked at her in confusion. Seeing their expressions, she tried to elaborate. I mean, like, as class president you have a better chance at helping us, right? It gives you some more authority and that duty to support us as you'd rather do. So, don't think of it in a negative way like it's a position that's just more work. Think of it to be more positive. Like, a better chance to help us if we need help and a way to get closer to our classmates and make friends. Midoriya watched as the girl tilted her head to point at his gaming device. Games aren't always single player, right? Wouldn't it be nice if, one day we could all play together as a class? The boys all looked at Uraraka with wide eyes. Midoriya blinked as he thought about her words. He never really thought of it like that. Sure, there will always be the realistic responsibility to such a position, but she wasn't wrong about the more positive sides to it. He smiled, his eyes going soft as he looked back at her with gratitude. Bakugo and Ida noticed his expression and couldn't help but feel a little more positive at the mood change. Thank you, Uraraka-chan. No problem. Bakugo used a hand to cover his tiny smile. Not bad, round face. Not bad. The rest of their lunch continued into more light-hearted conversations. Eventually, Uraraka pointed out how Ida had a rich boy aura, which caused the boy to look shy before explaining that he was the younger brother to the turbo hero, Ingenium. Apparently, his family had a small hero legacy going on. Suddenly, the loud blare of alarms rang in their ears. Midoriya was quick to keep his ears covered at the loud noise, especially once the students began getting up and forming a noisy crowd. Ida asked a senior student what the alarm was about before the guy shouted something about a security level 3 breach before running off. Midoriya just wanted the noise to stop, so he ended up doing his best to weave through the crowd to the large glass windows. All he saw was the swarming press that he remembered waiting outside UA since the morning. He was thankful that Kachin was with him this time as he pulled him through safely. The blonde even made aggressive threats to make them back off. Now, they somehow got onto UA's campus, which was causing this unneeded chaos. Midoriya quickly looked for something to connect to, a camera, or even a sign that connected directly into UA's electrical system. His emerald orbs eventually locked on to a mounted security camera, his eyes glowing before he vanished. No one seemed to notice the strange disappearance in the commotion. The crowd soon halted to a stop once there was a painful crackling and high-pitched noise coming from the school speakers. Once it was over, the students realized that the alarm was completely gone. Everyone's gaze looked up to the nearby school speakers as a voice filtered through. Everyone from Class 1A that was present stared in shock at the familiar voice. "Everyone please remain calm. The security breach was a false alarm due to the press outside. Please disperse in a calm and orderly manner. We are UA students, not panic savages. The pileup you have all made during this simple false alarm would be enough to trample someone to the point of severe injuries if someone failed to stay up. Everything is fine. Now, return to your seats and think about how you could have dealt with this scenario in a more mature fashion. Thank you." As the speakers turned off, murmurs filled the room as everyone began to think about the chaos while many looked at their fellow students with apologies on their tongue. Soon, there was a familiar green flash and there stood Midoriya. He seemed to be adjusting his uniform as his friends began to jog towards him. "Midoriya, there you are. We got worried when we couldn't find you." Ida spoke up as his arms seemed to go into the strange robotic movement. "That was you on the speakers, right? How did you do that?" Uraraka wondered. Bakugo just stomped over and ruffled Midoriya's viridian curls. The nerd just went and pretty much infiltrated UA systems. Ida and Uraraka just stared at the short boy. Ida looked like he wanted to scold the teen for breaching UA systems, but at the same time, the chaos would have continued over a false alarm if the boy didn't act. What? The two ended up asking simultaneously. Midoriya shifted his gaze away as his cheeks took a slightly pink hue. "It's something I can do with my quirk. It was the same technique I used during our quirk apprehension test." "You mean the weird teleporting move?" Uraraka said as she tried to remember the details. "Sure." Midoriya shrugged. Ida let out a sigh as he glanced around to make sure everything was fine. "Well, at least everyone seems fine. It could have seriously gotten out of hand if it weren't for you, Midoriya." "Thank you." No problem." Uraraka sent the shy boy a bright smile and a fist pump into the air. "We told ya that you'd make a great class president." Bakugo took a peek at Midoriya's expression as the poor boy couldn't process all the sudden praise. The blonde just chuckled at his friend's reaction. He gave the shorter a small pat to the back. "Good job, nerd." "Kachin." Midoriya whined with a pout. The only thing the trio could think of was how cute their class president's pout was. Nizu had finally returned from his office after checking on the disintegrated UA barrier. It was certainly a concern and he wasn't quite sure of the message behind it. He could tell that it was nothing good though, and it made him worry for his students. As he began to resume his work on his computer, he noticed something strange. There was a notification alert for non-authorized tampering with UA's systems which took place during the lunch PRD. When he ran a system check, there was no trace of the intruder still being there or leaving some clue behind. When he began doing camera checks, he was able to witness the chaotic scene that took place in the lunchroom. At the very top of the camera near the exit, it barely caught a tiny trace of a flashing light before it vanished. Nizu watched as the students seemed to be paying attention to the direction of where the speaker was. He decided to check the automatic voice recording software to see what was being said. Imagine his surprise when it was the voice of a student. It was only a little while after the students began returning to their routines did the culprit choose a spacious area in a clear view of the camera. Nizu's eyes gained a spark of interest when the light revealed Midoriya Izuku of Class 1A. "Interesting. What exactly did you do, Midoriya-san?" A masculine hand weaved its fingers through blood-stained locks of hair. "We're all so glad you finally decided to be more obedient." The man could hear the rattling of metal as leather restraints dug into the child's flesh. It may hurt now, but don't worry. All your body needs is more time to get used to it all. Before you know it, you'll barely feel the pain. The hand pulled at the hair in a strong grip as a whimper filled the room. You better be very thankful when that happens too. Thankful that I'm letting you have such a gift. The child tensed at the echoes of more footsteps entering the dark room, ears picking up the sound of objects being picked up from the hooks on the walls and metal tools being lifted from trays. There was a deep breath nearby before something pierced her arm. The room filled with screams and sobs. Initially, Class 1A was a bit nervous when Aizawa came up to announce their next training exercise. Whether the man realized it or not, he sure had his own sadistic flair for dramatics. The atmosphere lifted though when they found out they were going on a field trip to learn about rescue. It was mainly just learning rescue during natural disaster scenarios. There was excited chatter as the students sat in the bus, their costumes making them a colorful bunch, as the soft hum of the engine filled the air. Ida's mood was a little soured when the bus layout wasn't what the teen thought it was. No one could really blame the boy for his dedication though. Midoriya decided that he'd like to get to know his other classmates more, mainly due to Uraraka's encouragement during the false alarm. That's what led him to sit by some of the classmates he never really had gotten to be around that often. Ended up being pretty quiet. Maybe he should start trying to initiate conversations? Hey, Midoriya? He turned towards Azui. Yes, Azui? She shook her head as she responded with, just call me Tsu. Midoriya nodded. Tsu sounded cuter anyways. The teen noticed how she had a finger to her chin and a thoughtful expression. I'm usually quite blunt when I speak and I tend to say whatever's on my mind, but I've been really curious about what your quirk is, Karo. The others nearby heard the frog-like girl's question as they began to tune in to the conversation. The pink girl, Mina, jumped in. Yeah, I could never tell what it is. I thought you had some sort of teleportation quirk. Jiro held her phone in one of her hands, a single ear jack plugged in while her free hand twirled the other ear jack. It seems like that, but then I thought it was some sort of electric quirk like Kaminari. There was also the fact that Kaminari gave you a good shock and you didn't even seem affected during the battle trial. Whatever it is, Kirishima began, it is totally awesome. Midoriya's cheeks gained a tinge of pink as he struggled to find the right words. My quirk? Well, I call it VR. VR? Like, as in virtual reality? Uraraka questioned from her seat. The teen nodded. Yeah. Midoriya glanced at the ceiling. Not exactly sure what to really call it, but it does involve electricity and technology overall. I didn't get that hurt from Kaminari's electric shock because I was able to absorb most of it to give me more energy. The teleporting thing. I guess it is technically teleporting. Azui tilted her head. Technically, I can't bring my body wherever I want. There has to be some sort of electronic device in range. From there, I can transport my being inside the machine and then, well, pop back out. That's how I ended up near the finish line of the 50-meter dash. It's because I just used that scoring bot to bring me closer. Kaminari seemed to lean over to the point of falling as he tried to get closer to the conversation. Oh, that is, like, even more epic than my quirk. I can't do cool stuff like that. Sato seemed to be in thought. Wait, so you can just go inside machines and electrical systems? Midoriya nodded, only to slightly startle at Kirishima's exclamation as the redhead thought back to the security breach. That's what you did back in the lunchroom, right? You just found some sort of access point and managed to infiltrate UA's systems. Dude, I think that's illegal or something, but that ended up being so manly. Viridian eyes widened slightly. Do you think I'm in trouble for that? He noticed Azui shake her head. I don't think so. That is a pretty major deal and I feel like they would have called for you if you were going to be punished. Besides, they probably saw why you did it and decided to excuse you. Midoriya relaxed a bit at that fact. Either way, you're like a computer program or something. Kaminari shouted. You can go inside electronics and mess around with them and you can get an electric boost. That's sweet. You could literally become one of those AI overlords from those sci-fi movies. Thank you? Green eyes blinked slowly. That's certainly a way to compliment someone. Kirishima gazed at his own arm as his quirk activated. You have such a manly quirk, Midoriya. That's gonna be so useful in hero work. My quirk isn't very flashy and I can't really see it carrying me that far compared to the quirks of some of our other classmates. Emerald Eyes observed Kirishima's quirk in action. I think it's perfectly fine. But I honestly don't think flashiness is that important. It's the usefulness and versatility that matters. What usually makes a quirk flashy is no different than some special effects. Sure, it may not naturally catch everyone's eyes that much, but you are a unit that plays defender and melee. You have the ability to protect others with your own willpower and the ability to use that drive to fight back. By graduation, I'm sure you'll be a wonderful hero. When Midoriya looked back up to face the redhead, he became slightly alarmed at the pinprick of tears beginning to form in Kirishima's eyes. Are you okay? That speech was so manly. Others around the teen's sweat dropped. The rest of the bus ride ran pretty smoothly other than the small bit of teasing that was sent Bakugo's way. Midoriya just returned to playing with his mini pinball keychain in silence. He felt a little nervous to speak after that wave of praise and the praise for his pep talk. Were his quirk and explanation that big of a deal? Welcome everyone to the unforeseen simulation joint. I like to call it the USA. Midoriya was sure he wasn't the only one who found the acronym familiar. His head tilted in thought. Universal Studios Japan? He couldn't tell if the space hero in front of them did that on purpose. When they had arrived at the large building, it was absolutely massive. In all honesty, it seemed to be even larger when they walked indoors. The ceiling was a dome, a central plaza located in the center of it all. Circling the perimeter of the building's interior were various natural disaster zones. For learning rescue in dangerous natural conditions, this was really impressive. Midoriya frowned though at the sight of the conflagration and downpour zone. Thank goodness he decided to not bring any of his video games with him. His emerald orbs still lingered a little longer at the sight of the conflagration zone. He wasn't exactly excited to be launching out of the frying pan and into the literal fire. There was a small squeeze on his shoulder, the short teen turning his head to see Bakugo giving him a look of understanding. Midoriya silently appreciated that. However, Midoriya became a little curious when he had caught sight of Aizawa and 13 having a quiet conversation. There was something having to do with 3 before the two teachers turned to face the class. Everyone was listening intently at 13's speech of the dangers their quirks could cause, even unintentionally. Many took it to heart, especially those with quirks that were more destructive and harmful in nature than most of their peers. Midoriya ignored the small wince Mina had as the girl briefly reminded herself of when she almost hit Aoyama with her acid. As the class gave 13 an applause, Midoriya felt himself freeze. No one else could notice it except him. His quirk seemed to act up like it was making him sense some invisible tether between him and the USJ's systems. There was an interference and it just seemed to tug at Midoriya's chest with unease. It was too sudden, it wasn't right. A power failure? It was more invasive than that. When Midoriya blinked out of his trance, he finally recognized the sensation of Bakugo shaking him by the shoulders. The rest of Class 1A and the teachers stared at him with worry, Aizawa making his way closer. I think there's someone dash. Before Midoriya could finish, everyone glanced up as the ceiling lights flickered and shut off. The plaza fountain struggled to run before it eventually turned off. Aizawa ran back towards the stairs, the man's instincts kicking in to warn of approaching danger. Everyone watched with held breaths as a purple vortex seemed to appear out of thin air, expanding until it became a massive wall. Midoriya felt Bakugo tense beside him as villains poured out from the vortex. A part of Midoriya felt reminded of the hordes of enemies that would appear in those hack-and-slash games. Are those fake villains for the lesson? Kirishima's voice questioned. The class slightly flinched as Aizawa suddenly held an arm out to signal them to stay back. Those aren't fakes, these are real villains. Kaminari, try and contact the school. Kaminari was fiddling with a device he wore on the side of his head, his expression becoming fearful and frustrated. Guys, I can't call for help. I think something is jamming the signal. Midoriya's eyes widened as his mind began to plan. 13. Protect the students. Aizawa shouted before jumping into the fray, his capture scarf billowing around him as he began to use his quirk. The green-haired teen couldn't help but stare at Aizawa's form with concern. The pro was a stealth type who relied on surprising the enemy and using his speed to make his attacks count since he lacked attack power. For the man to rush into an army of villains instantly put him at a disadvantage. There were unseen eyes of glowing red as the man fell closer to the villain horde. 13 began leading Class 1A to the doors, Midoriya being dragged along by Kacchan. He tried his best to look around and avoid falling as his blonde friend pulled him. The green-haired teen soon regained control of his own legs as he separated himself from Kacchan to reach 13. 13. Said Hiro glanced his way. Where is the nearest security camera in this building to us? Why don't understand? 13 noticed the desperation in those green eyes as the student spoke. I can try and get past whatever is blocking the signal and I can get us help. Midoriya was relieved when the hero nodded their head in understanding. His eyes followed as 13 pointed to a security camera right by the large doors. Before Midoriya could do anything though, a purple mist blocked everyone's way. The teen's emerald eyes narrowed in frustration as the mist just happened to block his sight from the security camera. Greetings, children, and pardon for the intrusion. I am Kurogiri, and we are the League of Villains who have come to end All Might's life. Bakugo felt his curly-haired friend nudge him. Nerd. Got a plan? He said with a low voice. Midoriya discreetly nodded. The camera. He's blocking my sight from it. The blonde gave a menacing grin. Oh, don't worry about that. I'll make him F off. You just help get our buttes to safety. 13 was just about to use their quirk against the mist villain before Bakugo suddenly shot off with the use of his explosions. Kurogiri was swift to move his hidden physical body out of the way, giving Midoriya a clear view of the security camera. Now nerd. In a flash, everyone noticed that Midoriya was gone. They had no time to focus on it though as the villain recovered, the mist encompassing the entire group in a large dome. Everyone did their best to hold on, but a majority of them ended up being separated into the various disaster zones. Midoriya's world became a void of static. It almost felt like flying, or maybe even swimming, as he tried to follow the path that would lead him to UA's main building. More specifically, Nizu's office. Just as he was making his way there, he felt a painful shock as he seemed to bounce off some sort of wall. That's what Kaminari must have struggled with. As soon as his hands made contact, it felt like he just got burned as he pulled them away with a hiss. He couldn't let this stop him. Who knows what is happening to his classmates right now? He's the only one with the quirk that can get help and break through this. He can't fail. Emerald eyes glinted with a strong resolve as he backed up before powering himself using the lingering excess electricity that surrounded him. He could have gained more if the power in the USJ wasn't cut off. His body glowed with an electric green charge, sparks dancing off his skin as he rammed against the barrier. It hurt, but he wouldn't let it win. He couldn't let it win. The muscles in his body strained as he kept pushing against that wall with everything he has. Eventually, he felt it creak under him, the barrier almost stretching like it was made of elastic as it did its best to keep Midoriya away. Ultra! From within the USJ, a villain cried out as some of the lights sparked and shattered from some sort of overload. Glass was raining down unnoticed as the class dealt with their own battles. Midoriya's body tumbled as the barrier seemed to shatter against him due to the strain. The pain from making contact with it began to dissipate and he barely acknowledges the small stinging sensations as the virtual shards scratched his skin. Midoriya's momentum ended up continuing as he seemed to shoot off like a rocket towards UA's main campus. The teen smiled with determination. Everyone, please bear with me for a little bit longer. Nizu was still in the middle of lecturing Toshinori when it occurred. Everyone within UA whipped their heads towards the ceiling or a school speaker if one was in sight. In a certain class, a well-known trio of students lit up at the sound of a familiar voice. All present teachers were tensed as the speakers crackled to life. Everyone, this is Midoriya Izuku of Class 1A. An ongoing villain attack is occurring at the USJ right now. Any available heroes, please hurry. We could not make contact earlier due to something jamming our communications. It is all clear now, so please hurry. Immediately, teachers excused themselves from their classes as they began hurrying towards the USJ, their weapons, and support gear at the ready. Nizu had just hopped off his spot from the couch only to be met with his computer constantly emitting its notification sound. The principal had ushered Toshinori to go, the skeletal man nodding before buffing up into his all-might form as he rushed out of the office. Nizu rushed over to see what was occurring on his computer, only to see his screen filled with the face of Midoriya Izuku. Ah, Nizu! You're still here. Midoriya, is there any other way you could assist your class from the USJ since you seem to have access to the systems? I'll be able to monitor them. Please carry a device that I can connect to so I can send you status updates. Thank you, Midoriya-san. The pros are on their way. Stay safe. Nizu then rushed out of his office, after grabbing a radio, to join the other heroes in their hurry to reach their endangered students. He could only hope that they weren't too late by the time they get there. When Midoriya returned to the USJ, he began rapidly shifting through all the cameras. He was relieved that all his classmates seemed to be holding their own, but it was Aizawa that was the most concerning. His eyes watched his teacher move, the pro's energy slowly draining from trying to fight the horde of villains. The man's quirk was also activating for shorter PRDS of time. Midoriya tried to sense if the man had some sort of radio on him. Thankfully, the man did due to his hero work and the teen was quick to speak through it. Aizawa tried to avoid thinking of all the ways this bad situation could get worse. He could only hope that the students were okay and that his mistake of letting that missed villain escape wouldn't end up being those kids' demise. His eyes widened in shock though when he heard the crackling sound of his radio on his belt. The man just barely stumbled out of the way of an incoming punch when he froze at the sound of one of his students' voices. Sensei, 433, ranged unit. The man had been in enough hero work to know that he should listen. The man had ducked in the nick of time, a projectile almost hitting his head. You better know what the hell you're doing, problem child. That was how the rest of his fight continued, the kid covering for his blind spots and letting him catch on to what kind of attack was coming his way. It didn't help his decreasing energy, but it sure helped him gain a better awareness of what was happening around him. That's when he noticed an opening leading straight to a male with shaggy blue hair and hands worn on his body. Aizawa decided that it seemed that the person was the head of this whole mess, so it would probably be best to put a stop to the villain. He could tell that all of these villains were mainly petty thugs. Criminals like this tend to become hesitant and usually disperse if their ringleader falls. As Aizawa ran in to take the opportunity, he briefly heard his student telling him to be careful. As he charged for a hit, he wasn't too surprised that the hand-wearing villain blocked his attack. What he wasn't expecting was the sudden pain in his elbow. His skin. It was flaking off to the point of exposing muscle. Sensei. Aizawa was quick to take a leap back in order to distance himself. That is a very dangerous quirk, and now the hero was down an arm. He gritted his teeth as his eyes narrowed into a glare. If only he could keep his quirk on for longer. Huh? The boy scratched at his neck with a single hand, his red gaze staring at Aizawa. Was that the sound of one of those brats? Are you cheating, Eraserhead? By using a strategy guide? Yet, here I was, thinking that you were cool. The villain was soon interrupted by the sudden appearance of Kurojiri. Shigaraki, I apologize, but somehow the children managed to contact the heroes. I remember that one had disappeared and I haven't seen them return. Shigaraki's fingers twitched. So, are you saying we've got someone hacking into our game plan? The villain's face twisted with anger. Is the voice I heard before the brat that did it? I don't like cheaters. How dare they cheat? The skin of his neck broke and shone a fresh crimson. Kurojiri, find the cheating brat and kill them. I want them dead. They're ruining everything. Demon hacker. Demon filthy cheater. The hand villain seemed to decline into an eerie calmness. Nomu. Midoriya saw it coming, his pulse beginning to fill his ears. Sandash. Emerald eyes widened, the glassy surface reflecting the horrifying scene before him. Midoriya was still as he watched the camera perspective show Eraserhead get pinned to the ground by that monstrous creature. The man's quirk didn't even change a DMN thing. There was blood in the air and the man's signature goggles broke in half as they flew some distance away. The creature's muscular hand was holding the pro's head in a tight grip. The team noticed how the villain leader's shoulders shook as if he was laughing at Eraserhead's misfortune. The Nomu used its free hand to grab Aizawa's arm, which looked way too small and thin in that thing's grasp, as it snapped it like a twig. Midoriya had to squeeze his eyes shut for a moment at the sight. These cameras weren't picking up any audio, but his mind was making it up for him. The teen cringed as his brain unwillingly tried to mimic the sounds the boy would have heard if he could hear his teacher be beaten and broken. He didn't like the imagined sound of a snapping bone as his teacher's mouth let out a scream of agony. Midoriya feels like he was going to be sick. He then realized that he couldn't let this continue. He was ultimately useless now if he continued to seek safety in the USJ's system. Aizawa could die right now in an instant. That thing has the strength to do it, and his teacher was lying there and was so vulnerable. He shivered as he saw the blood that pooled across the ground. Yet it just solidified his resolve. Midoriya left Nizu a quick update about the Nomu creature before reappearing at a camera nearby the plaza. When Nizu and the pros were about a little over halfway towards the UV, his eyes widened slightly at the sight of a skeletal Toshinori who was crouched on the path and coughing up blood. The others noticed the man, knowing his identity, and rushed over to see if he was all right. Nizu climbed off Snipe's shoulder. "Toshinori-san, are you all right?" The man coughed a few times before shaking his head with despair. "My time limit, Timenet. If only I had a little bit longer to rest, I could have dash." Nizu raised a paw to quiet Toshinori as he turned to the other pros. "Please, continue to aid the students. I will stay by All Might's side until he is able to join you. There is no time to waste." The group of pro heroes nodded before rushing off. Nizu saw how the older man's sunken eyes were full of despair, guilt, and frustration. The principal sighed. "Toshinori-san, while you should have been more responsible about your limits, you can't keep blaming yourself. But Nizu, if I still had time, I could have gotten to those kids and saved them before the other pros could even arrive. What if some of them are dead by now? If only I had more time to rest before young Midoriya's call. I dash. Toshinori." When the hero looked up from the ground, he noticed the principal's gaze held a swirl of similar emotions. Toshinori felt bad for acting like he was the only one being plagued by such feelings. There is no use in wondering about what ifs. All we can do is hope those students can persevere until help arrives. Until then, all we can do is hope for the best outcome. The two rested at that spot in a tense silence. Toshinori couldn't help but curse All for One for giving him this disability. Another part cursed himself for letting that criminal overlord the chance to injure him so severely. This is what happens when people decide to cheat the game Eraserhead. They get punished for it. Shigaraki hissed as he glared at the bleeding hero. Aizawa struggled to breathe, air passing through clenched teeth. Kurogyari had warped away to check on the other zones and groups. Shigaraki didn't really care though. As long as the villain didn't get taken out of the game, it was fine. He was still majorly sad at the mist villain for letting one of the NPC brats get away. But Shigaraki did enjoy a good challenge. Games weren't too fun without at least a little bit of them. All of a sudden, he felt something smack the side of his head near his eyes. His red gaze watered slightly, his hand cupping the impacted area. Fuak! Another solid pellet was shot at him, making the villain stumble. "Get away from him!" A green-haired teen stayed at a distance, one of his once-hidden weapons staying aimed at the target. The boy had grabbed one of his Wii remote batons as soon as he popped out of the security camera. The teen had pressed its buttons in a short, but secret pattern to make its parts shift to make it more normal-sized. Midoriya had then pulled a special attachment piece in which he placed the Wii remote in. It was like a real functioning Wii remote gun holder, the thing filled with non-lethal but painful ammunition. It made it suddenly look like he had a pistol that was slightly larger than the real deal. However, it didn't really matter in the end since it worked just like a real one. It just was heavily gamer-themed. When Shigaraki looked up, he saw one of those hero brats in that stupid gear. He noticed how those emerald eyes of the boy were locked onto him with a fierce intensity. The blue-haired villain did notice the boy's visible weapons and actually took a better look at the kid's outfit. The boy looked like a straight-up gamer, and was the part of the outfit underneath that hoodie supposed to look like one of the Croft's in-game outfits? They both seemed to ignore the pained grunt of protest coming from Aizawa as he heard his student's voice. "And what kind of NPC are you supposed to be, brat?" Midoriya tilted his head, voice still soft, but gaining a slight edge to it as he spoke. "You seem to think that this level is on single player." Shigaraki actually paused at the wording. He seemed to cackle a little under his breath as his expression split into a disturbing grin. He is starting to like this one. It is such a shame this boy is trying to be a hero. At least he is living up to his costume's appearance. Maybe you really aren't one of those insignificant pawns. Say, aren't you the one I heard from Eraserhead's radio? You're the one who helped him cheat. I wouldn't call that cheating. I was just directing him. What kind of player would I be if I didn't help those in my party, especially when one of its members charge into battle without our healer? For once, the hand villain couldn't exactly disagree with that argument. He didn't even fall into one of his fits. This one was very interesting indeed. It looks like you really are another player. Say, care to join my party instead? Mine is much more interesting than this little hero party. The teen let out a little grin. Sorry, but not sorry. I think I'm quite satisfied with the amount of EXP I've been gaining here. Shigaraki sighed. Oh well, that is quite a shame, little player. Nomu. Before Midoriya knew it, he had jumped back as he initiated a backflip. The Nomu's ground-shattering punch landed at the now empty space as he missed the teenager by a hair. Go a little easy on him, Nomu. I want this one alive. The green-haired teen was quick to take another leap backward as he sent a small rapid-fire towards the creature's eyes and brain. The Nomu was fast enough to dodge most of the hits, but a few were lucky to at least make an impact on its exposed brain. While there were bleeding and a small inhuman noise of pain, the damage seemed to have been undone. A healing quirk? I thought it had. No way. There's multiple? Midoriya gritted his teeth as he holstered his ranged weapon to focus on dodging. He needed time to think of a new plan. Hitting its brain seems to be viable for causing it to be distracted for a small amount of time, but Midoriya had to find a way to make real damage. He barely paid attention to Shigaraki's sinister laughter as he watched the struggle. Impressive, isn't it? Its regeneration quirk is at max skill level. You won't be able to even keep it down. Regeneration. That's what most healing quirks do to injuries. However, healing quirks, even ones as great as Recovery Girls, has a limit. As the green-haired teen rolled to the side, his feet quickly pushing his body up to run, his eyes slightly widened. Burns, fire. If a body is capable of being regenerated, that must mean it has to have living cells, right? However, incineration and severe burns can kill those cells and prevent them from healing. Midoriya thought about the electricity being stored within his body. He remembered taking whatever he could before leaving the USJ system. Would he have enough electricity to spend to cause electrical burns? Or would he burn himself out in just doing one move? There was the possibility that this thing could recover from burns. There is also the chance that electrical burns won't even work. That thing, it's regenerating at a constant rate. The instant it gets injured, it heals automatically. That means that any damage done has to be greater and consistent in order to prevent it from reversing injuries before they can reach deeper. I hate it when enemy units have a way to constantly heal when the player units are too weak. The teen was able to notice that Shigaraki was less secretive about this creature's abilities. Maybe he could get the villain to brag more? Midoriya barely dodged the thing's arm that swung towards him. Called this thing a Nomu, right? Shigaraki actually paused and looked at the short teen. Yes. Nomu was made to be the perfect and ultimate weapon against all might. That symbol of peace won't be smiling anymore once he realizes that Nomu has shock absorption. Okay, so not only is it likely given a strength quirk on par with All Might's, but it has resistance stats and consistent healing on top of it. Great. Midoriya tried to keep the conversation going, his breathing becoming labored. Those heroes either had to get here now, or he had to make a plan quickly. Don't why you think this is cheating though? It feels like dash, that punch was way too close for his liking, a DLC that those pay-to-win players get. Seems pretty unfair to me. The green-haired teen was about to, probably, do one of the stupidest things he has ever done as his eyes took the risk to glance at Shigaraki. As expected, the other teen was getting angry. Before Midoriya could back out, he raised his voice a bit to make sure the villain heard him. If you're a real player, then how about you show your actual skills and fight me one-on-one instead of relying on your pay-to-win unit? I always did look down on those who use their money to win at games and then act like they actually put effort into the game. The only time I appreciate those types of people is when they still work hard and mainly purchase the extra content out of support for the developers or to have some fun messing around. Nomu, stop. Midoriya was relieved when he could finally take a small break. The creature came to an instant halt as it seemed to become like a statue with no other orders. Midoriya tensed as he faced Shigaraki, who scratched at his neck that shed with flaking, dry skin. So, you want a fair fight, eh? I can respect that from a fellow player. The villain leader was swift despite his appearance as he charged at the panting Midoriya, his hands outstretched for his quirk. However, I think I'm at a much higher level than you, hero. The green-haired teen hurried as he desperately pulled out his other Wii remote baton. As he swung it to protect himself, it ended up being caught in Shigaraki's grasp. Midoriya was quick to let go and create some distance between them as his emerald orbs watched his weapon turn to dust. Better it than me. Midoriya's gaze narrowed as he pulled his Wii gun out. It doesn't disintegrate the mass entirely in one instant, it actually takes some time. Yet, it still disintegrates way too quickly to be good on the human body. At least I shouldn't have to worry about having entire bits of my body gone as long as I don't let him make contact for too long. Neither had been paying attention to how much time has passed as the pair continued their dance. The villain would curse and become agitated every time Midoriya was able to hit him with his Wii gun or sneak in close for a lucky hit with his nunchucks, the blades giving the villain non-fatal cuts. Shigaraki even found himself coughing and hacking when the kid Ifenyu whacked his throat with a Bruce Fangili jump kick of all things. Midoriya did have some close calls though, as he lost half of his Wii nunchucks and some tears in his outfit from the disintegration. Some of the quirk's effects did reach his skin, but nothing too deep. They were just small, stinging patches of exposed flesh. Suddenly, both of them heard the USJ's large doors burst open. The yellow metal doors broke apart and folded up at the sheer force. When Midoriya looked up, he took a deep breath at the sight of All Might. For once in his life, Midoriya noticed the man was far from smiling. There is no need to fear, students. The buff man dropped his yellow striped suit piece to the side as he tore the blue tie around his neck right off. For I am here. Midoriya would look back at this moment and facepalm at his stupidity. With Shigaraki's obsession and quest on defeating All Might, the teen assumed that the villain would have paused to focus on his goal. Anyone who knew Shigaraki, though, would be surprised to see that he wasn't distracted at all by the hero's loud arrival. By the time Midoriya's eyes looked back at his opponent, his vision saw those dry hands centimeters from his neck. Emerald orbs widened and he swore he heard some of his classmates' voices cry out his name. Good game, player, but I win. The USJ filled with Midoriya's agonized screeches. The second Bakugo heard Midoriya scream, his brain went into overdrive. The blonde was quick to propel himself forward with his explosions, glad that he was able to finish off those low-level thugs. Kirishima was barely able to keep up with his classmate as he did whatever he could to catch up. When they finally reached the plaza, they saw All Might battling against the Nomu creature. There was a hand-wearing villain who was observing the battle from a safe distance. As Bakugo's eyes swept over the battlefield, he saw two different puddles of crimson. There was a small relief when he noticed two forms slumped against the ground and out of the way of the fighting. The second he saw Viridian curls stained with red, he ran over. Aizu-chan. The blonde grimaced at the state of his friend once he got close enough. Midoriya was, thankfully, breathing even though it was lightly. There was exposed muscle from decay to the right side of the base of his neck at around the same height as the boy's trachea. The majority of the injury was mostly moving to the boy's shoulder area and only crept a little up the actual throat. However, Bakugo noticed how there seemed to be a line that appeared thumb-like that stretched towards where the teen's trachea was actually located. None of the injuries seemed to be too deep, and Bakugo feared what would have happened if the damage actually created a gaping hole in his friend's throat. He shivered at the grotesque imagery. Then, there was a second area a little under Midoriya's collarbone that was the size of a palm. The blonde took a quick glance at the blue-haired villain who kept watching All Might's fight with disturbing glee. He had a gut feeling that the hand villain was the one with such a dangerous quirk. Bakugo could tell these would scar even if they were mostly covered up by the blood, but he found a small bit of gladness that they wouldn't look too much like handprints if his friend recovered from this. Not if he recovers. It is when he recovers. Kirishima noticed how Bakugo had Midoriya covered, so he was quick to check on Aizawa. He winced at the injuries the man had, especially on his elbow. He couldn't think of what else he could do except carrying their teacher to someone who has better medical knowledge like the paramedics. At the moment, they couldn't do much. The redhead quickly went over to Bakugo to see how Midoriya was. Midoriya looked horrible. Kirishima had to avert his eyes as he took a few deep breaths. That was even worse than their teacher's injuries. However, he couldn't let this keep him from helping his friends, whether they thought of him as a friend or not. Bakugo, is there any way I can dash? That's when Kirishima noticed something strange. Due to the injury on Midoriya's collarbone area, the disintegration had worn away part of the short teen's clothes, revealing the slight hint of cleavage and what looked like a sports bra, or some sort of crop top. The redhead looked between Midoriya's unconscious form and Bakugo a few times with visible confusion. Kirishima will admit he isn't one of the brightest, but he wasn't stupid enough to not tell what a girl looks like. When he thought about it though, Midoriya's voice did have a high and slightly feminine tone. The green-haired teen spoke so quietly and softly though, that it could definitely be an easy mistake, especially when he was a young freshman male. The teen's sides also did look a bit curvy when his uniform stretched in certain ways. When Kirishima really started thinking, there were quite a number of signs he never put any thought into. Bakugo glanced at the redhead at the sudden silence. Kirishima looked at the blonde nervously as he spoke. I thought, this Midoriya dash. Not. So, how about you help me save these morons' lives and shut the F up until I can explain later? It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Kirishima nodded in agreement. Bakugo's gaze still held that burning inferno that Kirishima remembered seeing when they fought those villains together, but this felt more controlled. It was controlled to the point of being calm despite it still feeling like a volcano was ready to erupt. It was certainly a strange and contradicting mix of emotions. The redhead wasn't quite sure if he could even describe it right. The ability to see the blonde wielding that animalistic anger, but stay there with an eerie calmness was something Kirishima never thought he'd see from his classmate. Oi, shitty hair, use that stupid but cape skirt sheet or whatever you call it. Kirishima looked down at his costume. He seized the large red fabric that was meant to help pay homage to Crimson Riot. At the same time, it was actually perfect for creating some form of makeshift wrapping for wounds. He never actually thought about that. I see what you mean. Got it. Who knew that the blonde could be so resourceful? The teen was quick to remove it from his waistline, using his quirk to help cut the fabric into certain pieces and sizes as Bakugo focused on instructing him and wrapping the injured. A part of Kirishima wondered how the blonde learned how to do this. By the time they finished, Midoriya and Aizawa's major injuries were securely wrapped in red. The pair felt slightly uncomfortable as the fabric began to soak with blood. Will they be all right? The two swiftly turned with their quirks at the ready, only to see Todoroki standing there. The two-toned teen had narrowed eyes as he seemed to assess the injuries from where he stood. Bakugo huffed out a sigh. They will be once we get them some help. Both of them have some nasty but wounds that are bleeding too much for my liking. Kirishima and Todoroki watched as the blonde carefully lifted Midoriya in his arms in bridal style. The small trio then heard a couple of pairs of approaching footsteps, followed by gasps. Bakugo had his back turned to them and his body was reacting before Todoroki or Kirishima could stop him. Oof! Bakugo realized that he had just gave a kick to Shinso's stomach. The blonde growled in annoyance. For FS sake, are all of you idiots trying to get your butt kicked? Warn us, why don't you? First, it was half and half and now it's you sneaky fucktards. Shinso and Azui glanced at each other. Yeah, that probably would have been a smarter idea when they're trapped in a villain attack. Sorry, Karo. That's when they began to pick up the relived cheers of their classmates who were at the USJ's entrance. When the group looked up, they saw the many forms of multiple heroes. Nizu raised a paw with a smile. There is no need to fear, students. Backup has arrived. The explosive blonde took the chance to get the group moving as he faced his classmates with a serious expression. Alright, I got Aizu. You, Insomniac and Frog Face, go help lift Aizawa-sensei. The pair, still drying from being in the flood zone, did their best to ignore the names as they began to carefully pick up their teacher. Todoroki and Kirishima looked at Bakugo expectantly. Before the blonde could get a word in, they all heard All Might grunt from pain. They turned their heads back to the battle only to see All Might bent backward as he tried to take down the Nomu, only to be stuck because of Kurogiri's portal quirk. The hand villain seemed to cackle with glee at the sight. The group was only able to slightly see that bleeding crimson staining All Might's shirt from their angle. You too, shitty hair and half, be useful and help out All Might from getting himself killed. They didn't need to be told as the pair hurried, Todoroki swiftly sending a wave of ice. Bakugo focused on getting Midoriya to safety, taking a glance at Shinso and Azui before heading up the stairs that were cleared of villains thanks to Present Mike. As he was running up the stairs, he finally saw a group of his classmates, some who were by 13th side. Their relief at his safety was quick to vanish though once they saw all the blood and an injured Midoriya followed by an injured Aizawa. Bakugo carefully placed his friend on the ground and out of the way. Uraraka gulped as she bravely walked closer. Will he be okay? The blonde just sighed, his red gaze lingering at the crimson staining his friend's body and his own. I don't know. The brunette's eyes widened and before Bakugo could ask why he felt a weak hand poke at his ankles. He was quick to sit up on his knees as he carefully holds Midoriya's hand. Aizu, you there? Neither of the pair liked how Midoriya's eyes seemed to be dull and unfocused. It was different from how the teen usually was. For Bakugo, it was more startling than it would be for most people because he knew Izuku. He knew that Izuku couldn't afford to let himself become so unfocused and unaware. The green teen couldn't afford to. Midoriya seemed to try and lift his free arm, his hand trying to reach the decayed spots. Bakugo was swift to snatch the teen's wrist all while being careful. Oi, Aizu! Don't go touching it, alright? You don't know if it itches and I don't know how much it hurts, but you can't go rubbing at it. Everyone who was close enough froze at Midoriya's attempt to speak. Bakugo and Uraraka cringed when the short teen's mouth opened, his tongue trying to form letters and words that he couldn't. It all just created a wheezing and wet gurgling sound, as if he was trying to speak while gargling water in his throat. Midoriya seemed to become frustrated, causing him to try again and again. The crackling, squealing, and other inhumane sounds just shook them to their core. Bakugo used a hand to gently shut his friend's mouth as he sent a stern glare. Finji moron, stop doing that. Your whole neck area is screwed up and I don't know how bad. Just try and calm down, okay? Bakugo watched as those dull orbs stared at him before beginning to close. The blonde panicked at the sight. Isn't he supposed to keep his friend awake? Or was that only for those with concussions and head wounds? Either way, he found himself lightly tapping his friend's freckled cheek. Nerd. Aizu, you better be planning to take a nap like some lazy but cat and not go dying on me. If you die, you know I'll find a way to bring you back just so I kick your butt. It seemed to work for a little bit, but Midoriya soon found himself falling back into a dark world. Bakugo loyally stayed by his friend's side, not knowing just how much time has passed. He barely even acknowledged the sound of All Might launching the Nomu creature out of the USJ's ceiling. He only snapped out of his protective daze once the paramedics began to enter the building. Bakugo startled as a gloved hand on his shoulder as others loaded Midoriya onto a stretcher. You going to be alright, kid? Bakugo just gave a numb nod. You just save Aizu. All the blonde remembered were the sounds of people speaking to him as he was led outside the USJ to the bright blue skies of the outside world. It felt like it was mocking them all for what they suffered through. It had been hours now since the USJ incident. All of the students were sent home and given a few days of leave until UA could make some improvements in their security. Nizu and the rest of the UA faculty had to push away their own feelings as they filled in paperwork, picked up calls, and answered questions. The desk phone on Nizu's desk rang and a white paw was quick to answer. Hello, this is Principal Nizu speaking. I assume this is about the USJ incident. Yes. Greetings, Nizu. I am Midoriya Hisashi. Midoriya is Zuku's father. The principal nodded with a hum of acknowledgement. I see. It is unfortunate that this is our first real conversation. Do you know how my son is doing? I have yet to get to the hospital and was stuck at work when I heard the news announce the incident. Yes, I have recently gained a report from the hospital he was sent to, as well as the other injured. Nizu shuffled through some emails before finding what he was searching for. Your son only had 2 major injuries that had to be dealt with. The rest were minor and may scar, but those scars are very likely to fade over time. However, the 2 injuries of concern were caused by a disintegration quirk. It had managed to reach quite deep around Midoriya-san's neck as well as the muscles connecting to his shoulder. There was also damage done to the area a tad below his collarbone. Both are about the size of a hand and he was lucky that no more was done. The fact that Midoriya would have likely died in the worst-case scenario did not need to be told. I see. Midoriya Izuku will be monitored carefully until they deem him well enough to be discharged and sent home. He is to not strain himself and stay bedridden. They do plan to send him home with medication and prescription creams for later on to help with pain, stiffness, and scarring. Thankfully, he had enough energy later today to have Recovery Girl heal the worst of it all. That should help with speeding up his initial recovery time. Rest assured, he appears to be out of the danger zone, though he is expected to have trouble speaking. It is unknown if any permanent damage was done that will affect breathing or speaking in the long run. Once he gains more energy, Recovery Girl does plan to try and speed the healing process more. Thank you for your time, Nizu. Farewell, Midoriya-san. We wish the best for your son's well-being. The call ended. As soon as Nizu placed the phone back, his expression became a slight frown. He turned to his computer to do some research. He needed to double-check something. A tragic incident occurred today at around 12:17 in the afternoon where a local Muzutafu pharmacy suddenly went ablaze. Fortunately, there were many staff who had exited the building for lunch, but those who remained inside were unable to be rescued. The local police and heroes managed to arrest the suspect, who was known as a pyromaniac villain notorious for setting structures on fire with no apparent pattern. He was spotted near the scene and had to be chased down the streets. The child's eyes glowed with the light of the television. The kid barely felt a large hand rest on their shoulder. What's wrong? The man asked. Without even moving their gaze, the child raised hand with a finger pointing at the TV. The finger wasn't pointed at the lady telling the news, but at the small box that played a short film of the burning building. Teardrops began to slowly drip down the kid's cheeks. Mommy? Katsuki, Bakugo watched as his mother crouched down and gently held his tiny hands in hers. There's something you have to know. The blonde just tilted his head in confusion. He could feel his mother's hands trembling. From his peripherals, his father is leaning his back against the wall and glancing away from his wife and son. Auntie Inko won't be able to come over to our house anymore. Why? The blonde was getting annoyed at his parents' strange behavior. He was oblivious to the pained looks his parents tried to hold back. If Auntie Inko can't come over anymore, then that means we can just go to her, right? What's the problem? The dam broke, his mother pulling away as the kitchen filled with sobs. The blonde watched his father embrace his mother in an attempt to comfort the woman. The blonde child noticed how his father was giving him the silent message to leave the pair be for a bit. Bakugo left the kitchen in stunned silence. He didn't understand. Kirishima walked up the steps leading to the Bakugo's front door. He glanced back as he reread the text the explosive blonde had sent him. He double-checked to make sure he got the right address. When he rang the bell, he waited with slight anxiety. The redhead's attention was caught when the door opened and introduced him to a woman who looked extremely similar to Bakugo. It was almost a little scary. HM? Oh, hello. Who are you? I'm Kirishima Ijiro of Class 1A at UA. It's nice to meet you, Bakugo-san. The blonde woman smiled. So you're my son's new friend. Kirishima swore he heard the explosive teen shout something in the background. Please, just call me Mitsuki. It will help it be less confusing too. Sure. The redhead startled when the smiling woman turned back to the inside of her house with an angry shout. Why, brat? Your friend is here. Don't keep him waiting. There were some thumps from the second floor followed by, I get it. I'll be right there, you old hag. Mitsuki then turned back to Kirishima like nothing happened, her body moving out of the way of the entrance to the home. Sorry about that. Please make yourself comfortable. As Kirishima walked in, removing his shoes in the process, he could only sweat drop at the shouty interaction. He definitely knows now where Bakugo got his fiery side. It was when he had taken a few sips of tea and shared some small talk with Mitsuki did Bakugo finally make his way down. The blonde teen just waved a hand as a gesture to follow. There you are, shitty hair. Come, let's go. Kirishima excused himself as he followed the blonde upstairs to the teen's room. He tried to ignore Mitsuki's shout about how Bakugo addressed the redhead. Of course, the blonde shouted back with his own disagreements. When they finally got to his room, Kirishima was a little surprised at the fact that the blonde seemed to have some gaming-related stuff. I guess it wasn't too surprising since the teen seemed to be close to Midoriya. Bakugo just plopped down to sit at the edge of his bed, his arms crossed as he stared at Kirishima. Alright, I invited you here cause there's some shit that needs to be said. First of all, whatever I tell you here stays a secret or I'll murder you. Kirishima is pretty sure that the blonde wouldn't actually do that, but it was enough to get the point across. Of course. That'd be unmanly of me if I spilled secrets and stuff. There was a short silence between them until Bakugo finally spoke. What are your thoughts on Aizu? Like, in general or dash? Bakugo huffed. Just, for FS sake, spill your DM mind about Aizu being a girl. I don't care if you word it in some shitty, a-hole way because at least that means you're genuinely telling me what you think. The redhead thought about it for a bit. He didn't want to accidentally say something wrong because, in all honesty, he really didn't mind about Midoriya being a girl. I think it doesn't really matter if Midoriya is a dude or not. Or she is still that totally epic classmate we all met on the first day. She's still the same person who selflessly ran in to save those people from the 0-pointer too. I'm not sure what exactly you want to hear, but I don't think that Midoriya's gender matters. She's still the same person, right? All it means is that she's just physically different, 'cause girls, Kirishima blushed a little at the end, giving an award cough. Yeah, he'd rather not think of Midoriya like that. That ain't a very manly thing to do. The redhead watched with nervousness as Bakugo nodded and seemed to think over the shared opinions. But I'm glad you aren't an a-hole about it. Kirishima sighed with relief. Okay, so he at least passed whatever kind of test that was. Shitty Kirishima, that definitely alerted the redhead on how serious this was. Make sure to keep this secret and don't slip up when you're supposed to go calling her by male pronouns. The reasons are personal and if she wants to share them with you, then that's her choice. I expect you to be a friend she needs and help her out if she needs it. That also includes keeping her gender secret from those who don't know. With Redhead's eyes glinted with determination as he bumped a fist against his chest. I swear I'll do my best to help him. The teen then had to instinctively catch a controller that flew at his head. He looked down at the old device with confusion. It was different from the usual round buttons that were placed in a diamond formation with the A, B, X, and Y controls. There was cube-like print at the top with faded word spelling GameCube. When he looked back at Bakugo, the blonde had his own controller and was starting up the purple box console installed in his room's TV. The blonde's red gaze shifted to him. Ever played a friendship-ruining racing game? Wait, what? Welcome to a game with racing carts and boxes that give you the ability to F over your pals with stupid but items. Mitsuki brought her child out to the mall that day. She was giving the blonde child the ability to choose a gift for Aizu's 6th birthday. The woman patiently watched her child in the hero merchandise store as he seemed to evaluate what item was worthy of being Aizu's gift. Bakugo was struggling with what kind of present would make Aizu super happy. Out of his peripherals, he noticed the video game store that was open across from the one his mom and he was in. As he stared at the game store from the hero store's window, he vaguely remembered a conversation he overheard. Now, the blonde usually wasn't one to pay attention to others he deemed unworthy of his time, but the group of boys during recess were being stupidly loud that day. They were talking about the latest hit video game or something stupid like that. Bakugo didn't really care at the time. However, Aizu hasn't smiled in a very long time. At this point, the blonde was desperate to get something to light up his friend's life. Yet, maybe something brought up by those annoying extras would actually do the trick. Bakugo and Mitsuki left the mall with a cheap handheld device. Bakugo kind of wished they had more funds and a couple of games. When Bakugo gifted it to his friend, Aizu was certainly confused at the strange device. They worked together to figure out how it worked, and soon the blonde found himself leaning over Aizu's shoulder as his friend played. Bakugo's gaze shifted to view Aizu's expression. He was pleased by the tiny lift of the girl's lips. It wasn't much, but he considered it a win. The door to the apartment slammed open as Hisashi shoved Midoriya in. He ignored the pained grunt from the teen as he shut the door. I can't if I believe this sheet. Midoriya was just about to lift his head when the man kicked the boy in the face. The teen tried to ignore the pain that came from his neck as it stretched from his head being forced to the side. Hisashi breathed in a strained breath. You just love causing problems for everyone, don't you? Don't you? Midoriya hacked when he breathed in Hisashi's smoke. The man's quirk tended to have more smoke emit when the man was angry or stressed. The short teen tensed and squirmed as Hisashi's large hand dragged the injured teen by the neck. Midoriya choked when his father lifted him up for a moment, only to be thrown into the barren room. Please stay in there and don't even think of coming out. Midoriya watched as Hisashi carelessly tossed the teen's prescriptions onto the floor of his room. The green-haired teen had to quickly close his eyes as a pill bottle flew towards him. It hurt as it bounced off his closed eyelid, but it could have been worse. Hisashi slammed the door and locked it from the outside. Midoriya could still hear his angry shouts and the shattering of glass. Now I've got to deal with a FING damaged product, 'cause of those nastiest scars. As if that boy wasn't horrendous to look at every day already. Now I gotta call the DMN hospital with the FING trans excuse so they don't try and F me over about the brat's gender. That's the last issue I want to deal with. Midoriya crawled his way to the mess he called a bed, doing what he could to rest. Hisashi dear? Can I talk to you for a moment? The man looked up from his paperwork to see his lovely wife. He gave a small smile to help with her obvious anxiety. Is something wrong, dear? Why so nervous? You're gonna make me nervous at this rate. Inko played with some strands of her viridian locks. I know that you have your own opinions about certain things, but I'm really happy about this. I'm just not sure how you'll feel even though we've been married for a good while. Hisashi's brows furrowed in concern, his pen being put to rest on the table. Inko, I am P-Arjun-T Hisashi. The man blinked in confusion. He could see why his dear Inko would be concerned. Very early into their marriage, he made sure to voice his opinion on not desiring children. Inko respected that and he respected her for understanding. He knows that there is no perfect way to completely prevent P-Arjun-Zui. Even using all safety measures can still have a probability of failure. Yet he was filled with uncertainty. Would he be able to care for a child? Would he be able to take the role of a father? As Hisashi looked at Inko's worried stare, her hands clasped as if she was praying for him to say something positive, he couldn't help himself from giving it a try. All parents have no answers to such questions when they have their first child, right? So, he didn't see any issue with giving it a try. As he joyfully lifted Inko with a cheerful smile, a nuzzle to her stomach despite her giggles and squeaked-out protests, He couldn't help the small feeling of excitement. What would it be like to have what others called a bundle of joy? Isashi was a curious man and he wanted to find out. He couldn't wait for the future. Toshinori stared at the file in his grasp. The skeletal man was in deep thought. He had found himself in deep thought a lot more often nowadays with his time limit and need for a successor. There was always Togata Mirio, who was recommended by his distant friend, Mirai. However, the #1 hero wanted to be able to find a candidate of his own. He won't deny that Togata has great potential as a successor. He has met the boy for brief PRDS of time as a teacher, and the teen was certainly impressive, but he knows it can't hurt to have more options. Toshinori stretched in his office chair, his joints cracking as he set the files down. The old hero soon had to head out, the file of Midoriya Izuku within his desk drawers. Class 1A was filled with mostly quiet chatter. It had been quite some days since they have last been in class considering the recent incident, but it felt like they returned much sooner than they thought they would. Many of the students just wanted a distraction, and it was a silent agreement to not think too hard about their own memories of the USJ. Eventually, they all turned their heads as the classroom door slid open. Bakugo entered the classroom with Midoriya trailing behind the blonde, the short teen playing another one of his many games. The class did their best to not stare at the bandages that slightly peeked past Midoriya's uniform collar. "Midoriya, I am glad to see that you are doing well." Ida greeted with a salute. The short teen just gave a small nod in response. When Midoriya sat in his seat, a few classmates crowded around him. The teen could hear Bakugo growling at the fellow students as a way of warning them not to pester the green-haired teen too much. A part of Midoriya wished that the blonde wasn't so protective at times. "Hey man, you gonna be alright?" Kirishima spoke up. For a second, the students wondered if they were going to get an answer. Then, Midoriya finally spoke up. "Yeah, I'll be fine. Recovery girl just wants me to keep these on for a bit as a precaution. Technically, I'm all healed up. I have some stiffness in my neck on that one side, but it doesn't hurt." The group of friends and eavesdropping students felt relief at that. The teen's injuries had left many of them shaken. And then entered Aizawa, who looked like he was ready to be buried in an Egyptian tomb. "Good morning, class." His monotone voice greeted. The class could only stare at the mummified man in disbelief. "Aizawa-sensei, we are glad to see that you are doing well." Ida's voice rang out. "What about that looks like he's doing well?" The class simultaneously thought. They just watched the man make his way to the front of the classroom with a hunched back. No one was entirely sure if they should believe him when he stated he was fine. "Putting my health aside, know that the battle is still not over." That made everyone tense as multiple negative scenarios flooded their minds. Class 1A was caught off guard by the large grin that took over Aizawa's face. After all, there is the upcoming UA Sports Festival. There was a massive wave of relief that was quickly replaced by a competitive atmosphere. Everyone knows about the famous UA Sports Festival, an event that had risen in popularity over the years and has become the replacement of the pre-Quirk era Olympic Games. While everyone was thinking about the event, Midoriya could only think about how it was the perfect time to start pulling out those Olympic-based video games featuring that red plumber and that blue hedgehog. Oh yeah, I guess he should be thinking about the sports festival. Does swinging a remote around count as training? Nerd, please tell me you're thinking about the sports festival and not video games. Bakugo was met with silence and an innocent expression. Some of their classmates turned to look at Bakugo as the blonde just face planted his desk, sudden bang of the desk catching some of the students off guard. Midoriya just turned away and focused on his game to not involve himself. It was during their lunch PRD when it happened. Midoriya ended up with his small circle of friends made of Uraraka, Ida, Kirishima, and Baku. Shinso was still a challenge to convince, but Midoriya was sure he'd one day get that purple-haired insomniac to sit at the same table. On their way to lunch, they ended up falling into a discussion about their personal reasons for being a hero. Ida had his inspiration from his older brother and his family legacy, while Bakugo said that he wanted to keep those cruel motherfuckers in line so they don't ruin lives. When Uraraka had to share, the girl ended up quite embarrassed. The group could see why if they took her reason out of context. The girl just wanted to help use the money she'd be able to earn to help out her poor family who owned a not-so-successful construction business. I don't see the issue with that. Our society's economy runs on cash, so there's no problem with making sure you can survive in the world. I'd see a bit of an issue if you had enough to get by in life, but wanted more just to simply have more money. Plus, hero work would help a lot with that since they can get paid quite a lot. If you can help save lives in the process of caring for your loving parents, then I see zero issues. Midoriya voiced, his gaze leaving his game as he stared at Uraraka. Bakugo said, he ain't wrong round face, and if anyone has an issue with that, then they obviously don't understand what it means to have money issues in a society that demands the use of money. Anyone with a FING brain will be able to see the kindness behind it. Uraraka gave them a bright smile, eyes threatening to tear up at the display of support. She really was expecting them to be negative towards her reason. Midoriya-kun, what's your motivation to be a hero? She had questioned. The group watched as the teen played his game, his brows furrowed in thought. Bakugo had told them that the short teen liked to take time when answering to avoid saying the wrong words. That was something Uraraka, Ida, and Kirishima could respect. Before they could get an answer, the group paused and stared at the not-so-hidden form of All Might around a hallway corner. Pissed. Young Midoriya. He whispered loudly. The man then raised his neatly wrapped bento, his other hand gesturing for Midoriya to follow. Care to join me for lunch? Uraraka couldn't help herself from mentally squealing how cute that was. Midoriya glanced at Bakugo, the blonde shrugging. If you want a nerd, just know that you don't have to. The green-haired teen ended up bringing his lunch with him as the teen followed All Might. The rest of the group just continued their way to the lunchroom. As they spoke quietly about what had just happened, they failed to notice how a certain two-tone teen, a little further ahead in the lunch line, listened to their conversation. Todoroki returned his gaze forward once he felt Bakugo stare in the cold teen's direction. Yagi knew how to speak in front of crowds. He also knew how to comfort civilians during a crisis. Yet here he was, a veteran hero and the symbol of peace, struggling to start a conversation with a teenager. Fortunately, it looked like he didn't need to say anything. You aren't here for just lunch. I'd appreciate it if you got to the point. The man coughed slightly out of surprise, the green-haired teen not once removing his gaze from his game. I have something I'd like to discuss with you, but first. Midoriya looked up only to try and wave away plumes of steam from his vision. When it finally cleared, his eyes widened in surprise as his mouth hung slightly agape. The tall and buff figure of All Might had deflated into a very frail and skeletal man. Yagi could see the boy's obvious confusion. This, the man gestured to himself, is what I truly look like. My quirk helps in giving me that strong form that many know of. It's like when men SCK in air as they flex by the pool. Midoriya stared as his brain tried to process the information, but he waited because he could tell there was way more to be said. It wasn't always like this though. The teen gained a grim gaze as Yagi lifted his shirt to reveal the ugly wound that seemed to stretch from his chest to his abdomen. About 5 years ago, there was a deadly villain fight that had left me severely wounded. I managed to keep this battle quiet from the public so very little actually know. Despite the many surgeries I had gone through, I lost some of my organs and continued to go through the decline of my health. This also had caused me to gain a time limit on my hero form as All Might. Due to the power I had to use at the USJ, I have less than my initial 3 hours prior to the incident. Midoriya found himself slouching on the couch, his brain not focusing on supporting it as the teen thought deeply. This was really starting to sound like some sort of adventure game plot or some kind of anime plot right now. Now that you know of my true form, I can tell you about what I really wish to discuss. Yagi watched the teen give a small nod as a sign to continue. The man wondered how the boy would take this by the end. Despite my fame, no one truly knows what exactly my quirk is. Many believe it is something such as strength enhancement. Whenever anyone has asked though, I usually manage to change the conversation with a joke. Yagi looked at Midoriya with a serious gaze. Please note that all of this information is to never leave this room. I understand, Midoriya answered. The teen played with the sleeves of his hoodie. My quirk is known as One for All. It is a stockpiling quirk that has been passed down for generations. One gains it and develops it only to pass it on to another who will do the same. Every time, this quirk will continue to get stronger with every pass of the torch. This power was one I was not naturally born with, but a sacred torch that was handed down to me. Midoriya was absolutely sure this was some sort of game or anime plot now. The symbol of peace having a secret identity, past, and now a secret power that can be given away? It is all a setup for some protagonist to go walking into. The teen wouldn't be surprised if there was some legendary arch-nemesis attached to this whole ordeal too. A quirk that stockpiles power and can be transferred to another person? That's... Midoriya wasn't sure what to say in response, but he had a feeling that he knew where this was heading. Yagi watched those emerald eyes stare into his very being. Oh my... Are you telling me you brought me here to become the next in line for your quirk? The short teen watched as the man clasped his hands and gave a firm nod. Yes, young Midoriya. I believe you have the qualities to make a great hero, and I would be happy to have you as my successor. Should you accept, you may even find yourself taking up my position as the symbol of peace one day. Midoriya knew he already had quite a strong quirk. Maybe not as strong as All Might's, especially after that information dump, but it was still a powerful set of abilities. Yet here he was, being given the chance to practically become an unstoppable force and the future's next symbol and #1 hero. The teen swallowed as his body tensed. How long do I have to decide? Considering the training and toll of learning a completely new ability and strength, I recommend making a decision soon. How about, for now, we'll plan to meet once the UA Sports Festival is over. You can give me your answer then. I see. Midoriya's gaze switched from All Might to the room's wall clock as the bell rang from outside the doors. Yagi gently rested a hand on the teen's shoulder. Listen, I know this is very difficult to take in. There is no issue with saying no if you really don't want this power. It is solely up to you. Midoriya returned to class that day with a lot more on his mind than he would have liked. It was the end of the day when his teacher approached him in the halls. Midoriya, may I have a word? Aizawa's voice spoke up. The teen already had a lot to think about due to All Might, but now he already has another teacher wanting to speak with him. He hoped that it wouldn't be anything major. Yes, sensei? How are your injuries? Midoriya blinked out of surprise at the sudden question. Was that concern he heard too? They've been doing well. Just some stiffness, but no real pain. Aizawa nodded. That is good to hear. However, know that just because you're healed doesn't mean you should slack off when it comes to your health. If you ever have any issues, please go to Recovery Girl. She'll probably not be pleased, but she knows what she's doing. That is all. Have a good evening, Midoriya. With that, the teen watched the man walked away down the hall. Was it just him, or did Aizawa go into parent mode? Midoriya decided not to think about it too much, and he continued his way to leave school. When Bakugo texted him about Kirishima knowing, Midoriya had definitely felt a bit nervous as the teen was welcomed into the Bakugo's home. He ended up finding the blonde and redhead waiting for him, the two checking out some of his games while they waited. So, Kirishima knows. Midoriya said as she turned to face Bakugo. Yeah. Shitty hair found out during the USJ. No one else saw though. Kirishima looked between the two with slight anxiety. This was a bit awkward. Hey, listen, I don't know the full reason behind it and stuff, but know that it doesn't really matter to me that you're a girl. You're still that totally epic friend I met since the entrance exams. The redhead watched as Midoriya gave a small smile in return. I'm glad that you understand. Bakugo and Kirishima watched as Midoriya pulled out the Wii console while tossing two controllers at the pair. Bakugo caught it with ease but snorted at the terrified face of Kirishima. Okay, so maybe Midoriya's weapons had caused some mental trauma. The redhead still caught the remote due to his reflexes, but still seemed to be slightly shaken at seeing it flying towards his face. The sports festival is coming up, so I thought this would be a good game to play. Midoriya inserted a disc that said something about London and Olympics. Bakugo turned to face Kirishima with a serious expression. Shitty hair, whatever you do, please for FS sake put the strap on your wrist. Kirishima liked to say he had a good grip on things and dismissed the warning. After all, what could go wrong? Midoriya and Bakugo ended up getting some ice packs and first aid half an hour later while Kirishima groaned in pain on the floor, a nasty bruise forming. Midoriya and Bakugo managed to create a makeshift ping-pong setup as they waited. It was the day of the UA Sports Festival and everyone in the class was in their gym uniforms buzzing with excitement or anxiety. Ida had given up on trying to stop the ping-pong match when Bakugo had to tell Ida off about how it was helping with stress. Midoriya was a bit more diplomatic than his friend as he tried to explain it in a way that would make Ida satisfied. All in all, everyone looked at the green and blonde pair and thought of how they'd make a good bad cop and good cop dynamic. Midoriya was thankful for his friend turning the waiting room table, pulling out a bouncy stress ball he sometimes carries around, and turning it into a game. Bakugo could tell his short friend was nervous about the loud and massive crowd that was waiting for them. The green-haired teen would have brought one of his games, but they'd be heading out soon and he didn't want any of his devices to be damaged or lost in the inevitable chaos. All he had was his phone which he could use to play some games in between the one-on-one matches, but right now, it wasn't exactly going to help with his hidden anxiety. Playing this sham of a version of ping-pong was enough to at least have his body doing something instead of sitting around. Midoriya. The teen caught the ball bouncing his way before turning to face Todoroki. Todoroki? Many of the students glanced at the confrontation. Looking at things objectively, I think I'm stronger than you. Midoriya could only tilt his head in confusion. Todoroki declaring war on him? However, All Might has his eye on you, doesn't he? Bakugo narrowed his gaze at Todoroki from where he stood. All Might only ever interacted with his friend once, and that was for lunch. He remembered seeing icy hot eavesdropping on the group's conversation that day. The blonde didn't think the guy would make the assumption that All Might has been some sort of secret supporter since the beginning of the school year. Other than that one time, Bakugo has never seen an ounce of favoritism for anyone in their class. Why did it even matter that All Might had his eye out for a promising future hero? After all, he and Aizu were going to be the greatest there is. Regardless, I am going to beat you. Kirishima awkwardly tried to ease the tension. Hey man, don't you think that's a bit dash? All right. Everyone could imagine themselves doing an anime fall at the innocent and simple response. Midoriya just stared back at Todoroki's apathetic gaze. The cold teen almost wavered at the hidden intensity behind those emerald orbs. It was like staring at a transparent gate. He could see the short teen's determination and strong will, but it was being controlled and restrained behind kind eyes. Todoroki, I'm not exactly sure what is going through your mind by sending me a challenge request. However, I do acknowledge how capable you are. You hold a lot of strength that I have not seen, and perhaps you really are stronger than me in a lot of different ways. We are all training to become the very best heroes we can be, so I know I cannot let myself fall behind. Bakugo noticed that glint in his friend's eyes, one he hasn't seen in a long while. The blonde grinned at the sight. I will be fighting with everything I've got. I do hope you can keep up, it'd be a shame to see you lag behind. The room went silent at the strength behind those words. Some actually glanced at Todoroki with bits of concern. There were those who were reminded of the brief moments they had with Midoriya before they got separated in the USJ. They remembered how that soft-spoken teen gained an edge to his voice followed by a serious and calculating aura. Those same qualities could be felt in the way Midoriya accepted Todoroki's declaration of war. It was a little jarring to see the short teen release that hidden blaze of fire when he was usually a gentle lamb. Before they knew it, they were notified to start walking out into the field. It was time. Welcome everybody to the UA Sports Festival. Can I get a hey? Present mic was met with even louder cheers. Alrighty then. Let's move on and start bringing out the Hero Corps students, shall we? Here we have Class 1A. They've been hitting it up in the news recently for their bravery against the USJ villain attack. The second they stepped out into the open, Midoriya had to wince at the massive audience's shouts and cheers. He knew that their class was popular due to the USJ, especially since nothing like it has ever happened at UA before in the past. Yet, he didn't think so many people would be this excited to see them. Midoriya tried to not focus on the sheer number of people who are watching their every move, either in the stands or at home. This was already pushing his anxiety into overdrive even though he looked completely calm on the outside. Now, give a hand for Class 1B. One by one, all the first-year courses were being introduced as they made their way out into the field. Midoriya hoped they didn't have it out for Class 1A too badly. He remembered how the other classes crowded outside their classroom. When the school day was over, the class found themselves unable to leave once the door was slid open. Outside of their classroom was a massive crowd of students from the other courses. Whoa, what's up with everyone? Kaminari questioned, intimidated by the sight of the crowd. Bakugo just huffed. You morons, can't you see that they're here to scout us out? Kirishima turned towards Bakugo. Scout us out. He means that the other classes must have heard a lot about us thanks to the USJ and now they want to see who they'll be dealing with for the sports festival. I am not sure if they meant to keep us from going home. Midoriya spoke up, his eyes staying on his game. Well, so this is Class 1A? A blonde with neatly combed hair spoke up. Everyone already disliked this guy's condescending tone. Not exactly what I was imagining now that I get to actually see you. After all, I'm sure we were all expecting an impressive group who fought off against real villains. Many of the students felt their fist clenching. That wasn't something to really praise about. It was a terrifying experience for them all, and the only good thing about it was the fact that there were no casualties. However, don't go thinking you are mightier than all of us just because you fought villains and won. I can assure you that Class 1B is much greater in strength. Just you wait. Class 1B will be stealing your spotlight before you know it. The entire class, and even the surrounding ones, began to get ticked off by the dude as he cackled like some villain. Everyone's sweat dropped when a hand had karate chopped the boy's neck, the teen's body slumping to the floor as he laid unconscious. A girl with very orange hair grabbed the boy by the collar of his shirt as she dragged him away. Sorry about that, everyone. Monoma can be a bit of a special case. Just ignore whatever he said. Bakugo was beginning to lose his temper, especially after being forced to listen to that arrogant blonde kid. Alright, listen up you extras. People like me gotta get the F home and I'm sure you all got places to go to. So F off and focus on actually beating us if you think you can. You're gonna need all the practice time you can. Class 1A face-bombed as the crowd of students went into an outrage at the blonde's words. Leave it to Bakugo to PSS people off. Bakugo, that was unacceptable behavior. Are you trying to make enemies for us? Ida scolded. Midoriya noticed a guy who seemed to turn his body into metal who yelled about Class 1A being a bunch of arrogant assholes. For some reason, that student kind of reminded the teen of Kirishima. The green-haired teen sighed at the drama. Well, he was class president so this should be okay to do, right? Very few noticed how the short teen's body glowed green for a second before everyone froze at a sudden static wave. Everyone went silent as they stared at Midoriya, some yelping at getting a tiny shock from the static electricity. Midoriya glanced at everyone before speaking. Is everyone finished now? None of the students in the crowd were sure if they wanted to respond after that display. It was just a tiny bit of static electricity in the air, nothing harmful at all. However, even those who were the oblivious type could tell that the small teen could do much worse. Midoriya seemed to not notice how his small act had caused many to become intimidated. I apologize for the spiky Pomeranian's way of wording things. The teen ignored his friend's growled objection. However, he is correct. Many of us have people waiting for our return and we have places we must be. I'm sure that all of you have your own strengths and weaknesses, but you should really work hard if you want to try and surpass us. Just because we're hero course students, doesn't mean we have the liberty to slack off. If we fall behind, we will fall and so we must always go plus ultra every day. Everyone flinched, even Midoriya's own classmates, at the sudden deadly glare that the short teen shot at the crowd of students. Also, don't think we are arrogant or bathing in the glory the media has been giving us for the USJ. It is obvious by how you're acting that none of you understand what it's like to face a life or death situation. It was something that we were not trained for. We may typically have strong quirks, But we're here to learn for a reason, and that's because there are skills we lack or must improve on if we wish to save lives and survive in our future. Don't you dare glorify us for doing what we could to make it out alive. Bakugo was left a bit stunned at his friend's ferocity. The teen never had to raise his voice, but somebody would really have to be dumb as a doorknob to not feel that animosity and scolding anger. The blonde didn't even notice when Midoriya took hold of his wrist and began leading them through the sea of students. All of them parted like the sea to clear a way for Midoriya. In a way, Bakugo mused, the short teen has definitely inherited that silent predator aura that Auntie Inko had. The explosive blonde couldn't help but pity whoever his friend would end up getting romantically involved with in the future. Whoever it was going to be, they're gonna get whipped as hell. When Midoriya found himself back into reality, Midnight was on the field stage. Now, it is time for the student representative to make their speech. Midoriya, Izuku, you're up. Midoriya blinked. Say what? Out of all things that Midoriya was expecting, he was not expecting to be the one to give the opening speech. Now, he had to make an improvised speech in front of a crowd made of hundreds to thousands of people. What is his life anymore? Why me? Ida spoke up beside him. It could be because you're the class president, but I think it could also be because you ranked first in the entrance exam. Midoriya forgot all about those rankings. He managed to take first from Bakugo, mainly due to those rescue points. The blonde ended up in second. Either way, he was definitely not ready for this. Nobody except Bakugo could tell how nervous the teen was as he made his way to the microphone. Everyone was wondering if the teen would ever speak until Midoriya took a deep breath, his voice ringing around the entire stadium. I don't think I'm very good with words, but I'll try my best. I guess. You could literally feel everyone's sweat drop at the blunt honesty. Listen, I know that everyone here mainly has their eyes on Class 1A. Midoriya noticed how the other courses seemed to grumble, because of the USJ incident. However, please note that there are plenty of others here who have their own potential. The media makes it sound like we should be glorified, but I can assure you that I find it wrong to glorify the fact that untrained children did what they had to in order to survive. That should be something to be relieved about. It should never be an experience that is used as some sort of trophy. We were fortunate that there were no causalities, so please do not use our own traumatic experiences to overshadow the potential that lies around us. Everyone at UA, even outside of the hero course, are doing their best and are working just as hard for their own goals. This is UA, an amazing school that manages to raise great potential in any course. It is because of that we will all do our very best today. We go beyond, plus ultra. Midoriya felt like he was going to break into a sweat when he finally wrapped up his speech. He was glad to hear the many encouraging cheers that followed and the more positive aura that the other course students seemed to gain during his speech. The short teen knew that it must be hard to work so much and know that no one cares because there is someone better. It might not change the fact that many are still here for Class 1A, but he at least wanted to help in forging good relations with the other students. Midoriya wanted to give them the comfort that there is someone who cares and acknowledges their efforts. The green-haired teen found many smiles passed in his direction as he made his way back to his class. Midnight took over as she began to officially start the events. Everyone watched the large screen show a spinning animation of the many possible events. Midoriya noticed how some of the guys seemed to blush at the sight of Midnight's outfit. She was the R-rated hero for a reason. What did they expect? Now, let's get this show started. Our first event will be... The wheel finally paused, allowing everyone to read the first event, the obstacle race. Everyone focused their gaze on the screen as it began to show an above view of the stadium and the area around it. Listen up now, or you may end up needing to drink your own tears, dearies. Treat this event as a qualifier for the next round. Midnight's whip made a loud snap as she waved it. All classes will be participating in this race. You will all be racing around the outer circumference of this stadium, which is about 4 kilometers, from the starting point to the finish line. Some students felt intimidated when Midnight glanced back at them with a sadistic glint in her eye. Now, children, remember that our selling point is freedom. She liked her lips with a smirk. That means that as long as you stay on the course, it doesn't matter what you do. Just focus on making it to that next round. The R-rated hero raised her whip to the starting line, which had a special gate around it. Now, take your places, everyone. As the students began making their way to the starting line, Midoriya paused and let everyone go in front of him. His emerald orbs narrowed as he examined the tunnel before them. That was going to get very crowded. He pitied anyone here who was claustrophobic. He heard the familiar steps of Bakugo approaching. When he glanced over, he saw the blonde nod. You see it too, don't you? Midoriya just nodded. The race began to start, the gate lights slowly turning off as it counted down. Everyone was ready to go and the surrounding audience went silent with anticipation. The last light of the gate went out. Start! The race began with a blast of sound. Midoriya paid no attention as Bakugo launched himself into the air with his explosions. He was confident that the blonde would do well. With a deep breath and a little stolen electricity from the machinery around him, he dashed towards the tunnel's wall. An electric glow surrounded his body as he gained enough speed to keep himself running on the wall for a small bit before he had to jump off. He began using the students below as springboards to avoid being stuck like everyone else below him. There was a sudden wave of frigid air as ice seemed to encase the tunnel. As Midoriya hopped, he noticed how many had their feet trapped in ice. So, this was Todoroki's tactic. It was pretty effective crowd control. The short teen soon found his feet on solid ground, the sun's rays warming up his skin. Midoriya wasn't surprised to see many of his fellow classmates surpass Todoroki's ice. The green-haired teen was carefully giving himself short bursts of speed with the electricity he managed to gain. He was almost worried about running out until the large shadows of multiple zero-pointers appeared. Following underneath them were the smaller robots from the entrance exam. But free batteries. Many students watched in fascination as several machines seemed to have a beautiful ribbon of energy connect to Midoriya's swift form. It was almost like watching an aurora as the robot's power was drained from them. When a robot would shut down, the thread of energy would begin to dissipate from the source and be completely gone by the time the fading effect would reach Midoriya's body. Midoriya took the chance to take as much energy as he could, quickly replacing the amount he was using. He made it just in time to move Kirishima and that metal-turning teen from getting crushed by the partially frozen zero-pointer left behind by Todoroki. Sure, the two both have quirks that would allow them to survive being crushed, but you can never be too sure. It is better to be safe than sorry. Are you alright? I know you could have protected yourselves, but I didn't want to risk any injuries. For a second, Midoriya thought he was looking at duplicates as they both simultaneously gave a thumbs up and a sharp smile. That was super manly of you. Thanks. The similar pair then ended up glancing at each other in surprise. Midoriya just decided to let them figure out their sudden twin mindset as he continued his run. The short teen could hear Present Mike shout something about the next obstacle being called the fall. When he made it there, he understood why it was called that, considering that there were stone pillars with ropes attaching to each one. Other than that, there was just a dark pit waiting below. There was a pink-haired girl shouting in the distance about how wonderful her babies were as she shot across the obstacle. Midoriya managed to get a glimpse of her as that support student launched into the air. Nearby students watched as Midoriya disappeared in a flash of light. The pink-haired girl was none the wiser to the student hitching a ride within her own invention. The girl only yelped in surprise when she reached the end of the fall and a flash of green blinded her for a second, only to reveal a curly, viridian-haired boy. The student watched with interest and confusion as the short teen gave a wave as he ran, shouting out, sorry, but thanks, before he was out of her range. The green-haired teen slowed to a stop at the final obstacle, which happened to be a minefield. They were harmless, but they did give quite the push if you happened to set one off. Midoriya bent down near the nearest landmine and began to carefully dig it up. If it was made out of what he thought it was then. Some passing students were quick to move on when they saw Midoriya crouched with a grin as he stared at a dug-up landmine. It was a bit unnerving. When Midoriya transported himself inside the machine, he felt even happier. Even though these devices were still individual machines, they all still followed and connected via the same system. In other words, Midoriya can travel to each one until he reached the end of the landmine field. As Midoriya shot like a rocket, bouncing from one landmine to the next at a rapid pace, he set off any and all landmines that ended up behind him. He, unfortunately, couldn't hear the startled yelps and shrieks from the students that got blown up despite never setting one of the landmines off. Even present Mike was commenting with a surprised shout at how the landmines seemed to go off on their own. Aizawa watched the live footage and seemed to be one of the rare few who noticed Midoriya using his quirk on the landmines. Those landmines aren't going off on their own, they're being set off by one of my students. The man would never admit the pride he was feeling at the moment. Present Mike exclaimed. Seriously? What are you teaching your students, Eraser? All the voice hero got was a terrifying grin. I didn't teach them anything. They just got riled up on their own. When Bakugo heard the sudden explosions behind him, he instantly knew it was Midoriya. Todoroki and the blonde were being careful as they fought each other for first place, their steps being put down with caution. Then, they were met with a flash of green above them. When they looked up, they saw the form of a smirking Midoriya materializing in the air. The short teen charged his body with electricity, and Todoroki and Bakugo could feel the air being forced from their lungs as the teen's feet hit their backs. Due to it being superpowered, the pair not only got pushed to the ground, but their faces ate dirt as they face-planted. Their falling bodies hit the landmines below them, but Midoriya made sure to activate the ones in between Todoroki and Bakugo just in case. The resulting explosions blasted both teens into the air and off towards the opposite sides of the field. Midoriya sprinted his way towards the finish line. By the time Bakugo and Todoroki caught up, Midoriya had already made it to the end with the gate emitting a loud buzz. There were colorful streamers that fell as a form of congratulations. Bakugo managed to snag second while Todoroki ended up in third. Todoroki gritted his teeth at only getting third place. He could have at least gotten second if it wasn't for his foolishness. When Bakugo and he fruitlessly tried to surpass Midoriya, he assumed they wouldn't be focusing on fighting each other as they had back in the minefield. Instead, the cold teen found himself stumbling out of the way of an unexpected explosion. The delay was enough for Bakugo to gain second place. Todoroki could only painfully watch as the blonde won by being mere inches in front of the cold teen. Todoroki just watched as Midoriya got his hair ruffled by Bakugo, the loud blonde chuckling at Midoriya's use of the landmines. You sly broccoli F-. You used explosions to beat me. That sheet is pretty backward if you ask me. Anyone watching though could tell it was all lighthearted. Once everyone had managed to make it back, they all crowded around as they watched Midnight bring up the scoreboard. Only the first 42 students who passed the finish line would be able to qualify for the next event. That meant it was time for the next round. Everyone watched with held breaths as the event will spun again. Looks like our next event is Tower Defense. Midnight announced. Pay attention as I explain the rules. Tower defense is much like a cavalry battle, except you won't have to worry about keeping someone hoisted on your shoulders. Of course, it also has its own challenges. The screen then showed a team made of 4 people. There was one member who seemed to be protected by the rest of the team who were forming a triangle formation, all while keeping that one person safe behind them. In a way, the ones on the defensive seemed to be trying to lock that middle person in a self-made circle. All of them wore some sort of special bracelet and a white headband with red numbers. Teams can be made up of 2 members with a maximum of 4. One person will take the role of the tower while the others play as the defenders. Overall, your team is allowed quite a lot of free movement, but you cannot stray too far. Midnight held up 2 different bracelet devices. One had a shiny red stone while the other had a blue one. These are wireless devices that come in sets. Once teams have been assigned, these will be passed out. The blue ones will go to your tower and the red ones will go to the defenders. I recommend keeping these intact. They have a small screen that will tell you how far away you are from your tower. Once you hit the maximum distance of 7 feet, it will give you a buzz that will be loud enough to hear and feel from your wrist. Go any further than your maximum distance on purpose and your team will be disqualified. Also, a warning. Do not purposely cause other teams to become disqualified by forcing them to separate beyond their max distance. Much like in the cavalry battle, other teams are not allowed to tamper with the formation of another team. If the team splits up too far by themselves, then that is on them. The hero watched as many nodded in understanding. There will be no punishment if someone's bracelet ends up broken. Think of it as an added challenge. So, if you aren't good at measuring distances mentally, I'd recommend protecting these. Use that tidbit of information as you'd like. The scoreboard flipped as it changed to list all 42 students, each with a growing point value. Depending on what place you got during the preliminary round, that is what point value you get. The tower and defenders will have a varying sum of total points depending on who you chose to have on your team. Do be warned that if an entire team somehow loses every single headband in their possession, then that team is out of the game. So make sure you all at least keep one headband on you at all times. When you decide on who will be your tower, make sure they wear the headband with the highest number within your group. It will do no good if a defender is worth more than the tower. Midnight pointed her whip at the large board. From the 42nd place, you start with 5, and for every place closer to the top, it will continue to increase by 5. However, this is where it gets interesting, because the first place participant is assigned 10 million points. Midoriya gulped and took a daring glance around. Just as he thought, everyone was staring at him with a competitive and greedy glint in their eyes. From her stand, Midnight liked her lips as she rested her whip over her shoulder. This system makes it so those below can reach for the stars. Watch out for them underdogs, people. Do what you kids need to in order to reach the top. Plus ultra. Midoriya could practically feel the suffocating atmosphere around him, a drop of sweat running down his forehead. This was bad. Really bad. Every time Midoriya would approach a potential team member, they'd politely excuse themselves before walking off to join someone else's team. It was understandable that people wanted to be the ones to nab the points versus protecting the points. After all, being a part of Midoriya's team meant that every single student was going to hunt his team down. To carry 10 million points means that whoever gets it is guaranteed to make it to the finals. Still, it didn't help make the feeling of rejection lessen. Midoriya slightly flinched when a hand laid on his shoulder. The familiar warmth, though, instantly helped the teen relax. He turned his head to see Bakugo standing beside him. "Nerd, it looks like you're having trouble making a team." Bakugo watched his friend gain a confused expression. "Kachin, I thought you'd be off making your own team?" The blonde could only shrug. "As much as I'd like to fight you for that 10 million, it'd do us no good if only one of us got into the finals. I'm sure you'd still find a way, but with a lack of any good teammates, it's gonna be a challenge." Bakugo just gave his friend a smirk. "Listen up, 'cause we either kick butt together or we get our butts kicked out of the competition together." Midoriya couldn't help but smile at his friend's consideration. Together, both of them stood there trying to see if there was anyone else who could help out. To be honest, the pair were sure they could pass this round with a team of just the two of them. After all, they've grown up together, trained together, and have sparred together. They know their roles and they knew how to cover for each other. "Hey, they're 10 million. The pair both turned to see a girl with pink hair and gadgets hover her way to them as if she was roller skating. The girl was obviously not going to be able to stop her momentum as she ended up too close into Midoriya's personal space. The green-haired teen tried his best to not fall over as the girl's hands tried to steady herself by gripping his shoulders. Bakugo swore that he could feel a headache in his future. "Since you're the one with a huge bullseye on your back, then that means everyone is going to have their eyes on you. That is just what I need in order to show the world my lovely babies." If Bakugo was taking a drink, he'd end up doing a spit take. "Why you're effing what?" Hee. They watched as the girl removed the steampunk-style goggles from her face, revealing golden yellow eyes with a crosshair-like design within them. "The name's Hatsum May and I'm from the support course where I make all kinds of wonderful babies." Midoriya could feel Bakugo's disbelief without needing to even look. The blonde was face-palming as he muttered about how wrong her sentences sounded. The green-haired teen could only hope that the blonde could adjust to the girl's use of calling her inventions babies. He did have to agree that it sounded really wrong out of context. "So, basically, you want to join our team to promote your work?" Midoriya watched as Hatsum nodded vigorously. Bakugo and Midoriya sweat dropped at the honesty. The girl then began pulling out different machines and as she explained their functions. The blonde only picked out the important bits from all the rambling and he still couldn't help, but think how weird it was when the girl said babies in a sentence that it should totally not be used in. He wasn't sure if it was a bad sign. He was becoming more tolerant of her phrasing. Midoriya began to wonder who could be their last teammate until he noticed a lone figure running over to them. Hey, there you are. Oi, it's shitty hair. Hey man, my hair isn't that different from yours. Kirishima complained when he finally reached them. The redhead flashed a smile towards Midoriya. I was going to team up with you earlier, but I kinda got lost in the crowd. Then I kept getting offers from others. It took a bit to finally get to you. Midoriya nodded. It was good to have at least another familiar classmate. While Kirishima has been more of a new addition to their group, especially on the more secretive side, it was at least better than having a complete stranger like Hatsum. However, it is obvious that the pink-haired girl is a smart one to create such devices despite her over-energetic personality. The green-haired team glanced up at the large screen to check the time. They had about 7 minutes until the round starts, which is plenty of time to make plans. It's a good thing that Midoriya is an excellent strategist and an excellent player when it came down to tower defense games. Alright everyone, time is up. Please put on the provided bands. Midnight announced. Present Mike looked on from his booth with interest. I can tell that this is going to be an interesting round, listeners. What do you think, Eraser? Aizawa watched as the loud blonde shot a pair of finger guns at him. I do see some interesting team-ups, he responded dully. Within the ring, Midoriya's fingers grasped the straps of the 10 million headband as he tightened it around his forehead. Bakugo stood ready as their offense. He was to try and generally stay in the front of Midoriya. Hatsum had her hover boots activated, her jetpack strapped on her to help make her more mobile. With her gadgets, they would help with keeping Midoriya out of the way of anyone who got too close by pushing him or carrying him around. She was to stay close by just in case Midoriya isn't quick enough to move out of the way in time. Then there was Kirishima, who was to generally stay close by as well. Due to his quirk, he'd be excellent for acting as a shield. He was going to be their defense. Midoriya thought this team was quite balanced with 2 members that can move swiftly, while they have one offense and defense role. Now, let's see if their plans work well in action rather than just in theory. Alright everyone, let's get the match started. Midnight shouted, her words causing the audience to cheer in response. All the students noticed that the distance tracking bracelets all turned on with a glow. Get ready. Everyone tensed with held breaths. Go! With the echoing crack of the whip, everyone immediately charged towards Midoriya's team. The roar of the crowds was deafening. Kachin! On it! Some of the more cautious teams slowed down at the sight of the blonde charging towards them as close as he could. When enough braver teams entered within Bakugo's range, his hands came together and emitted a growing glow. By the time the affected teams realized they should back up, Bakugo emitted a flashbang with his quirk. There was a loud echo of students who yelped and shouted to protect their sight. The light was blinding and easily allowed Team Midoriya to begin moving. They planned to keep themselves moving around the perimeter of the arena. While moving more towards the center could allow them more freedom, they could still get cornered by the active teams. They would also have to worry about keeping an eye on more openings that would appear from running into the center of it all. The team could still get cornered, but getting cornered is something to avoid entirely either way. Minuets were spent as Team Midoriya did whatever they could to avoid losing their points. There were certainly many close calls. One student's quirk had turned the ground into some sort of quicksand which got Midoriya and Kirishima trapped. Hatsum was quick to lift Midoriya out while using her jetpack and boots while Bakugo yanked Kirishima free, using his quirk to keep them in the air until they reached solid ground. Then there was Monoma's team who came too close to reaching Midoriya when he ordered a teammate of his to use a solid air quirk. Bakugo tried to blast the group away from getting closer, only to smack into the sudden bubbles of solid air. Monoma managed to tap Bakugo's exposed arm and the rest of Team Midoriya could only watch in surprise as Bakugo was blasted by his own quirk. Fortunately, Midoriya was able to emit a small electric shock wave to stun Team Monoma for a few seconds. The Class 1B blonde was too close to making contact with the green-haired teen. As soon as Midoriya ran out of the way, Bakugo propelled himself toward Monoma to give an explosion-powered punch. Midoriya could tell that his friend was getting ticked off by Monoma's arrogant bragging and dialogue. Team Monoma was shocked as Bakugo shattered those solid air bubbles as they tried to retreat from the raging blonde. Bakugo just grinned as his hands grasped many of Monoma's stolen points. He went back to help protect Midoriya before the Class 1B student could react. Midoriya wasn't sure how much longer they had to keep this up. He went to glance at the large stadium screen until a sudden shout grabbed his attention. "Watch out!" The green-haired teen wasn't exactly sure who shouted to him as the world turned into a blur for a moment. Hatsum had swiftly charged in to carry the boy out of the way of a giant hand. Unfortunately, she ended up tripping when the attack ended up hitting her and used jetpack. The force made her drop Midoriya, in which the short teen broke into a roll to avoid injury. "My baby!" Hatsum wailed sadly at the broken jetpack. Midoriya could only send her a sympathetic glance before having to move out of the way of another hand attack. His emerald eyes caught sight of the orange-haired girl from Class 1B who had also knocked Monoma unconscious. Can she just enlarge her hands, or does it work anywhere on her body? Midoriya pondered. Kirishima came in close with his quirk activated to help take some of the impacts while Bakugo finally caught up to keep the girl's attacks away with his explosions. "FB!" Bakugo warned. Team Midoriya went to protect their eyes as another flashbang was created. The other nearby teams who were unaware were blinded as well. The sports festival audience could be heard having a mix of excited cheers and small sympathies towards those who got caught in the blonde's flashbang. Sudden bright lights were a pain to deal with. By the time Team Kendo and the other teams could see again, Team Midoriya was already at the other side of the arena. That's when it happened, goosebumps tingling everyone's skin as a wave of ice made its way over everyone. Midoriya watched with narrowed eyes as Todoroki's team made their way towards them. The team had Ida, Yaoyorozu, and Kaminari who seemed to be working quite well together. The second team Midoriya noticed Yaoyorozu create an insulation sheet. They backed up as far away as they could. Midoriya prepared his quirk to absorb any electricity that got too close. The audience rang out in awe as all the frozen teams got zapped by Kaminari's electric shock. The poor students couldn't even move out of the way due to Todoroki's ice. The two-toned student even grabbed some headbands while his team passed by. Todoroki's team all wore roller skates and were occasionally hanging on to Ida to speed them up as a group. It made the entire team quite agile. Taking some points as they passed before anyone could react was simple for the cold teens team. Todoroki's gaze narrowed at the sight of Midoriya, his right side releasing a wave of ice. Midoriya's team paused when their path was blocked by a giant wall of ice. When Bakugo began hacking away at it with his quirk, it turned out it was going to take many broken layers until they could free a path up. They faced towards Todoroki's team, the leader locking eyes with Midoriya's. "I'll be taking that headband now." Then began an annoying game as Team Midoriya kept moving to the left of Todoroki. Since his ice formed from his right, it would take a little longer for his ice to reach the opposite direction. Todoroki gritted his teeth in annoyance. "We have finally entered the final minute, folks. Anything could happen. Let's see if Team Midoriya can keep that 10 million until the very end." Present Mike shouted with excitement. "I could get it for us." Ida suddenly spoke up. When the group faced Ida, they saw his eyes gain an intense focus. "I have a move that I have kept a secret from the rest of the class." "What do you mean?" Todoroki questioned with widened eyes. Ida turned to look at Yaoyorozu. "Will our roller skates be able to handle high speeds?" She looked thoughtful. "That depends. Define high speeds. Like a race car for a few seconds?" The girl looked down at their feet before facing Ida. "If it's only for a short time, they should still stay intact." "Good." There were about less than 30 seconds now. "Everyone, hold on tight to me." Everyone securely linked themselves as their hands held onto each other's wrists. They all turned to Ida and nodded as a signal to say that they were ready. Midoriya's sharp eyes caught sight of their movements and instantly predicted what the opposing team was about to do. The short teen was quick to signal the rest of his team as they began to enact their emergency plan. The audience shouted from the stands when Ida shot forward with a recipro burst, a large plume of smoke left behind like a trail. The second they got close to Midoriya's team, they were met with a sudden smokescreen and a barely noticed flash of green light. Everyone, both the audience and participants, stopped at the sudden sight and barely even registered that the buzzer had hit. The round has ended and Team Todoroki went for that 10 million only for everything to, literally, go up in smoke. Did Team Midoriya keep the points? I can't even see anything. Present Mike commentated with a yell. Everyone stared at the smoke cloud, some teachers arriving to do their best to dissipate it all so they could see the results. When it finally cleared, there was a moment of silence. Ida was crouched over and panting heavy breaths from his stunt, some of his teammates checking on him. Kaminari was a little ditzy from his wattage limit. Yaoyorozu was doing her best to watch over both of them. Todoroki stood and was facing Team Midoriya. The green-haired teen's team was spread out in different directions with heavy breaths from their own exhaustion. It took a moment, but everyone finally noticed the tower's bracelet in Bakugo's grip. The 10 million headband was tied around it and no Midoriya was in sight. The camera footage zoomed in on the blonde's grip for everyone to see. Midoriya's sharp eyes caught sight of their movements and instantly predicted what the opposing team was about to do. The short teen was quick to signal the rest of his team as they began to enact their emergency plan. "Kachin." He spoke up, just enough for Bakugo to hear. The boy nodded and Midoriya immediately undid the tie to the headband as he removed his bracelet with an unheard click. The short teen charged his movements with his stored electricity to perform the preparations in record time as he closed the removed bracelet and quickly tied the 10 million headband around it. Just then, Ida came charging towards them. Bakugo released a huge smokescreen and Midoriya transported himself within the electronic bracelet with a barely unnoticed flash. The bracelet clunked to the ground as Todoroki's team missed it entirely. Todoroki and his team's hands reaching for empty air. Hatsum was the closest to Midoriya's portion at the time and knew to memorize where he would be. She hovered to where the bracelet was and swiftly picked it up as she sped by. She then got close enough to where Bakugo was to toss it to him. Just as they planned after doing the switch, Hatsum gave a whistle as all the team members went in different directions just in case they could still be seen. The buzzer rang and they all paused in their movements. Team Todoroki didn't even realize how they were fooled. Well, would you look at that? Looks like Midoriya hid in the bracelet with his quirk at the last possible second. With all that smoke and at those high speeds, who'd ever think to try and find a tiny bracelet? Midnight just gave a smile and thumbs up. Midoriya had approached me about their emergency plan before the match started to see if it would disqualify them. Considering that he was still in the game and he was still letting the 10 million visible for grabs, I allowed it. After all, it would be no different than if he just shape-shifted into a smaller object. He technically is the bracelet. From Aizawa's seat in the booth, he hid a grin underneath all his bandages. Of course Midoriya would make such a clever backup. He's not sure if anyone had ever done anything like that in the history of the sports festival. It was certainly a one-of-a-kind performance. As Midoriya reappeared from the bracelet, the scores were being announced for which teams were advancing to the next round. "Now, let's see, we've got Team Midoriya in first," said Team all high-fived each other with shared grins. Followed by Team Todoroki for second place. Yaoyorozu did her best to try and cheer Ida up when he began to apologize for his failed plan. In third we've got Team Shiro. Shiro, Uraraka, Ashido, and Tokoyami cheered. Dark Shadow letting out a shout of excitement. Finally, in last place we've got Team Shinso. I thought I saw Team Tetsu there just a second ago? Present Mike announced with confusion. Shinso tried to not look guiltily at his team. He wasn't entirely on board with talking with them and telling what his quirk was, so he just ended up brainwashing them. The purple-haired boy walked away as Ojiro, Aoyama, and Shota, from Class 1B, began to snap out of their hypnotic daze. Ojiro stared at the retreating form of Shinso with uncertainty. It is time, listeners. We're about to soon enter the final round of the tournament. But first, we got our recreational activities. Everyone, Go enjoy a nice break before we march back in to see some epic one-on-one matches. Midoriya. May I have a word with you? Midoriya turned to see Todoroki standing behind him. Bakugo looked ready to push the guy over while Kirishima just looked unsure. Sure. Kachin, Kirishima, save a spot for me. I'll be back in a bit. Kirishima slightly tugged at Bakugo's shirt to try and guide the reluctant blonde away. The green-haired teen turned back to face Todoroki. He could tell this wasn't going to be a light-hearted conversation. Are you secretly related to All Might? Midoriya just gave a long and slow blink. Excuse me? That was not what he was expecting. Sorry to burst your bubble, but no. Even though I don't know much about him personally, I can tell that he would definitely be a better dad than my own SPRM donor. Todoroki seemed a little startled at the wording. You're what? The green-haired teen just leaned his back against the wall and crossed his arms. Listen, I know Endeavor is your father and I don't exactly like Endeavor at all in the first place. Let me just tell you that it takes one to know one. Todoroki knew what the teen in front of him was saying. You also dash? Have flaming trash as my father? Yes. They stared at each other in silence until Midoriya let out a sigh. When he looked up, Todoroki was met with a genuinely sympathetic face. It wasn't the pity he was used to seeing. It wasn't the face of someone who says, I understand, but they had no clue. The cold teen wasn't exactly sure if he should be happy to see someone who can sympathize with him because the implications of that were grim. Todoroki, what's your story? You can keep some things to yourself or everything to yourself. I know not to pry. Heterochromatic eyes met with emerald green. Ever heard of Quirk marriages? Midoriya Izuku has heard of Quirk marriages before. When you have someone like Hisashi as a father, you tend to learn about a lot of illegal subjects. It was a practice during the early Quirk era where people would marry if they had strong quirks and produce children in the hopes of having a child, or children, that had their parents' strong quirk or even a stronger variant. Todoroki's fire was inherited from Endeavor while his ice was from his mother. It was a terrible tale. A man obsessed with winning that he resorted to any means to surpass All Might, even if that meant child abuse and the mental decline of a wife he pretty much purchased. When Todoroki ended up being the golden child Endeavor sought for, the man was merciless, constantly training the teen and isolating him from his other siblings. The same siblings who Endeavor deemed as failures. Then, Todoroki just happened to walk into the kitchen where his mother was at the wrong place and the wrong time. Midoriya glanced at the scar marring the left side of Todoroki's face. He couldn't blame the woman for being pushed so far. He knows he has no proof, and he could be entirely wrong, but he feels like Todoroki's mother is sorry for what she did. A part of the green-haired teen wondered if something similar would have happened to his loving mother if she were still alive. I will never use my father's fire. I will never make him satisfied by using my left side. Midoriya didn't like the look in Todoroki's eyes. They were eyes holding an inferno of resentment. Yet, that blaze of resentment was so strong that it made the teen cold like a frozen tundra. It prevented others from getting too close as they would freeze before they could reach the core of Todoroki's mind and feelings. Midoriya was no psychiatrist, but that was an unhealthy sight to see. Then why don't you use it for yourself? Is it not your quirk? Todoroki stared as if he didn't understand what was being said. If Endeavor wanted to activate his fire quirk right now, would your left suddenly act on his command? Doesn't it only turn on if you want it on? Does it not reach wherever you want it to reach? Do you not make it move where you want it to move? You keep saying his quirk, and it sounds like he keeps saying you have his quirk, but you don't. Midoriya met Todoroki's stunned gaze. Todoroki, tell me this. Is the name of your quirk Hellflame? No, but dash. That's right. It's half cold, half hot. I bet you can't even do a majority of what Endeavor can do either. Todoroki couldn't deny that. His flames could never reach such intense temperatures as his father's, and he couldn't do anything more than normal flames. You don't know that. I haven't truly trained with my fire. I probably could do what Endeavor can. Do you want to use your quirk that way? Todoroki blinked. Your quirk, your limits, and your choice. He can say whatever he wants and demand whatever he desires, But you are Shoto. You are nothing more than a separate individual with your own thoughts, feelings, and skills. Is it really that hard to understand? Or are you comparing your quirks so heavily to endeavors that you are merging your own identity with his? Midoriya could see that the teen in front of him had no response. We should return to the cafeteria. It would do no good for us to be hungry when the final event starts. We'll all need the energy. The area was full of silence as Midoriya began to turn away. Wait! The green-haired teen turned around. What about you? Midoriya held back a sad smile. You'll have to be more specific than that, Todoroki-kun. Your father. What have you been through? Todoroki struggled to choose the right words, his mind filled with the words Midoriya had brought to his head. It was like his mind was instinctively trying to find the flaws and justify why Midoriya's reasoning is wrong. He breathes fire like those dragons from those fantasy games. He's not a friendly NPC either. Todoroki knew what it meant to hide behind a mask. It just made the short teen's words all the more saddening. He could see Midoriya's emerald eyes hold back that floodgate of pain. The kind you give a single glance at and you can tell it's gone on for years. Unfortunately, I'm not at a high enough level to beat him. It's a bit annoying, you know? Midoriya turned away and began to walk to the cafeteria. It'll be fine though. All it means is that I can't progress my story. Midor-. If you really want to know more, then you'll have to start making some life choices. There was a slight smile on Midoriya's face. It's like those dating simulators. You have to go towards the right path and make the right choices and changes that are needed to unlock the character's backstory. Until then, there is nothing more to say. Perhaps, if you can find your own liberation, then we could talk more. Todoroki couldn't find his voice as he watched the short teen walk away. He didn't like the cold pit in his stomach that said he just let a lone soldier go off to fight in a war entirely by himself. The recreation PRD soon ended and the students all gathered around to see who they would be pitted against. Many were upset and objected when Ojiro and Soda decided to drop out of the competition. They both said something similar about not remembering how they made it through the second event. It was certainly an honest response, but many thought they should stay in regardless because of the opportunity it would give. Midoriya could only hope that there were heroes out there who gave credit towards the pair for their reasoning. As the short teen read the lit-up screen, emerald eyes caught sight of his name right next to Shinso Hitoshi. Midoriya. The said teen turned around to see a slightly nervous Shinso. Before Midoriya could say anything, he found his mouth blocked by Ojiro's tail. By the time Midoriya got to move it out of the way, Shinso had already walked away. The short teen could see the purple-haired teen's dejection from a mile away. Want to explain why you did that? The green-haired teen asked Ojiro. The martial artist teen just flickered an uneasy gaze towards Shinso's figure from where they stood. I know he's our classmate, but I didn't want him to get you too. Ojiro knew he'd have explaining to do considering Midoriya's confused expression. Here it is, everyone. The first round of the final event. Get your hands together, listeners, for our resident gamer, Midoriya Izuku. On the opposite end, we've got the mysterious insomniac, Shinso Hitoshi. Both are students of Class 1A. Got anything to say, Eraser? Present mic could be heard saying. In the announcer's booth, Aizawa was staring at Shinso's student profile. It is very impressive that Shinso managed to make it into the hero course considering how biased the entrance exams are. It is illogical how those with mental quirks, or those who just don't have a battle-suitable quirk, are forced into failure because the entrance exam caters towards those with more destructive quirks. It is quite annoying. Midoriya watched his opponent across from him. The purple-haired teen held more anger in his eyes compared to when Midoriya saw him earlier. Midnight walked up as the referee, Cementos standing nearby for any stage repairs or assistance. Listen up. The round ends when one of you goes out of bounds or is incapacitated and cannot move. She watched both students nod in understanding. Midnight hummed before raising her hand up and then swiping it downwards. Start. Shinso planned to get Midoriya to respond to him. That way, he could use his quirk to order his classmate out of the ring. Before he could say a word though, he was interrupted by Midoriya speaking first. The short teen's soft voice seemed to sound louder in Shinso's ears than it did in reality. I don't know why you've been acting like this, but know that I won't give up on befriending you. Shinso paused for a second before having to grab hold of Midoriya's foot that had just tried to kick him in the abdomen. Was it just him, or was his hair frizzing up? What was that? An attempt to take me out in one go with the promise of friendship? Midoriya shook his head. No. Shinso grinned when his classmates' emerald orbs went blank and distant. Walk out of bounds. Present Mike could be heard yelling into the microphone. Say what? What's this? All of a sudden, Midoriya is walking towards the boundary line. Is this Shinso's true power showing? Shinso watched his classmate's figure wander like a doll. Sorry, Midoriya, but I can't afford to lose. Then, the unexpected happened as Midoriya's limbs rubbed the fabric of his uniform in the correct manner needed in order to create a static shock. Midoriya blinked, his eyes returning to normal as he breathed heavy breaths. He supported his body as he placed his hands on his knees while standing. The mental toll of fighting against Shinso's quirk from the inside was definitely taxing. The whole experience felt surreal and bizarre. How dash. That's when Shinso realized the signs he dismissed earlier. The short teen must have used his quirk to create static in the air as a backup to snap out of Shinso's quirk. That's why his hair felt like it was sticking up more. If that truly was the case, then that means that Midoriya knows. I know what your quirk is, Shinso. The purple-haired boy managed to aim a punch at Midoriya's nose. There was a small grunt of pain before the green-haired teen elbowed the tired teen in the chest. Shinso coughed as air was forced from his lungs. I can't tell what pain your quirk must have made you go through. I won't pretend to be someone who understands either. The pair began to shove at each other, using their weight and momentum to try and push each other out of the ring. When Shinso glanced back, he noticed he was getting close to the end of his side of the arena. However, know that I think it's perfect for hero work. I think it's an incredible quirk. I'm sorry that no one else could see it that way. Despite Shinso's best attempts, he felt as Midoriya lifted his body and flipped him over the green-haired teen's shoulder. He felt his back hit the ground with a pained groan. Shinso is out of bounds. Midoriya is the winner. When Shinso opened his eyes that had squeezed shut from his body impacting the ground, he expected to see a gloating Midoriya. His eyes opened and he was met with the kindest eyes he has ever seen. He doesn't remember the last time when someone looked at him like he wasn't a villain. Midoriya had offered his hand and Shinso numbly accepted it. He barely felt the pull as he stood back up. It surprised him that someone as short as Midoriya was able to just toss his body around like his weight was equal to a teddy bear. Shinso didn't even spot that much muscle on the short teen's visible skin. Are you alright? Shinso almost snorted at the question considering that Midoriya was looking at him with a bleeding nose. I should be asking you that. Midoriya wiped his nose and spotted the smear of crimson on his hand. From the look on the short teen's face, Shinso could tell that his classmate didn't even realize he had the injury. The pair had soon left the field and were making their way to Recovery Girl's office. There was an odd silence lingering between them and Shinso just couldn't find the words he wanted to say. He rubbed the back of his neck as he finally decided on something to say. Did you really mean what you said back dash? Of course. Midoriya's voice left the tired teen with no doubt. That wasn't the voice of someone who was lying just to be nice. The short teen beside him was genuinely wanting to be his friend. His classmate genuinely didn't mind his villainous quirk and actually praised it as a heroic quirk. Shinso wasn't entirely sure how to feel about it. It was so different compared to what he's been told for years. If you really don't want to be friends, or maybe you don't feel ready just yet, then that's okay. I just want you to know there are people that do care and I can see you becoming a great hero in the future. Your quirk is extremely useful for ending fights quickly and with minimal destruction to the surrounding area. It could help talk people down from doing something drastic and could save those in hostage situations that many heroes struggle with ending safely. Shinso just nodded as he looked at Midoriya with wide eyes. Just give it some thought if you need to. Is that all right with you, Shinso? Yeah, it is. Midoriya and Shinso managed to return to their designated seating area for the next match despite Recovery Girl. scolding them. The second the green-haired teen spotted Todoroki, his body tensed. He no longer paid attention to present mixed commentary nor Shiro's appearance on the other side of the ring. Midoriya didn't like those hateful eyes. It felt like the two-toned teen was going to murder someone. His fist clenched with concern. Bakugo's eyes narrowed as well at the sight of Todoroki's expression. He wasn't stupid. He could tell there was something very wrong going on. Midoriya and Bakugo glanced at each other before redirecting their gaze back to the match. At first, the fight was going quite normally. Shiro had shot a line of tape from his elbow as it wrapped around Todoroki's still body. Before the teen could swing Todoroki out of bounds, the entire atmosphere was being consumed with a frigid cold. Midoriya and Bakugo's eyes had widened at the temperature change and the appearance of frost on Todoroki's exposed arms on the teen's right side. The rest of their class was startled at the pair's synchronized shout. "Duck!" A ringing noise like that of glass filled the air as everyone gasped in shock. When Midoriya finally deemed it safe, he glanced up. His eyes widened in awe at the gigantic glacier that Todoroki had created. The short teen looked around to see if everyone else was all right, only to see them staring in just as much shock as he was in. "Holy shit, you icy hot beaky," Bakugo muttered. It took some time before it was confirmed that no one else got hurt from the iceberg-like structure. Only Shiro ended up trapped, and he was lucky to not get hypothermia from the frigid cold of it all. Even Midnight had parts of her body encased in shards of ice. Midoriya's gaze narrowed as Todoroki helped in finally melting the monstrosity the boy had created. The green-haired teen watched as the cold classmate walked off and out of the arena. Midoriya exchanged a few short words with Bakugo before chasing after Todoroki. He needed to know what happened. His mind kept replaying the sorrow and loneliness that he felt from watching Todoroki melt his ice to free Shiro. He didn't mean to freeze Shiro like that. He honestly didn't mean to. Before he left for his match, his father cornered him and made him so full of anger. If he were to describe it, he'd say it was like a match to gasoline within a box to trap it inside. Then he had to release his ice to win the match, and that box bursted open. Todoroki knew he could create huge glaciers of ice, but it didn't sit well with him when he thought about his actions now. That ice of his could pierce flesh. It could have killed someone regardless of the freezing temperatures it would bring. A small part of his mind remembered how it went straight towards where his classmates were seated. He was glad that Midoriya and Bakugo seemed to get everyone out of the way. Were his movements so obvious that the pair were able to tell what he was about to do? As he walked through the empty halls, he glanced up at the sound of heavy footsteps and warming air. Endeavor was standing in his way, wasn't he? Shoto, that was disgraceful. I told you to use your fire. I told you that I refused to. Endeavor was met with his son's cold gaze. The man just glared back. You can't expect yourself to keep this rebellious phase up. One day you will use those flames. Todoroki felt a growl from his throat. I told you. Within a moment, Todoroki's vision whipped to the side. He slowly raised a hand to his cheek where Endeavor had backhand slapped him. My patience is running thin with you, Shoto. The teen just spat at his father's shoes with disgust. F-Q. He swore that Endeavor's rage caused some veins to bulge as the man's hand reeled back for another slap, or maybe even a punch. Todoroki shut his eyes, body tensing, as he waited for the inevitable impact. The teen felt nothing, but his ears did pick up on Endeavor hitting something. When he opened his eyes, he caught sight of a ripple of green light that took the form of some sort of shield. Todoroki raised a hand towards what seemed like empty air. The second his hand touched that invisible wall, another ripple of green temporarily revealed the fact that there was some sort of barrier there. His eyes recognized that color. What do you think you're doing? Todoroki and Endeavor immediately turned their heads down the hall to see Midoriya casually standing a couple of feet away. Before either of the Todorokis could make a response, Midoriya had walked over and gently grabbed his classmate's wrist. The two-toned teen just numbly followed Midoriya as the short teen pulled Todoroki away from Endeavor. You're lucky that I had enough practice with my quirk to make that shield. I didn't know you could. Midoriya just gave the teen a small smile. It was very difficult. It's hard to keep wild electricity in one spot in the air all while making it take a certain shape and form. Endeavor seemed to snap out of his stupor as he clenched his fist and stared down Midoriya. What do you think you're doing, child? You have no right to interrupt my conversation with my son. That was a conversation? Midoriya rhetorically questioned. I thought it was a round of beat the sheet out of your child. I'm also pretty sure that the game is considered illegal. How long have you been playing an illegal copy of a completely illegal game? Endeavor's flames grew a little hotter from his anger. I don't know what the hell you are talking about, but that boy is my son, and if I want to speak with him, then I can speak to him. The man actually felt a part of him wanting to back down when those emerald green eyes turned toxic. When Todoroki managed to get a good look at his short classmate, he did back up a little. Midoriya's eyes were holding something like the promise of death, and his smile was so very kind but so very fake. It kind of reminded him of when people spoke about horror films involving smiling porcelain dolls. You are playing a very dangerous game, Endeavor. I hope you know that. Why, you don't know anything dash. I know a lot of things, Todoroki NG. Endeavor was at a loss for words. What have you been telling this boy, Shoto? Before Todoroki could form some sort of lie, Midoriya's voice cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife to butter. Whoever said that Todoroki-kun said anything? I don't need your son to tell me how much of a piece of shit you are. Todoroki and Endeavor both looked gobsmacked at the swear. Midoriya said it so easily and with such innocence that it was utterly jarring. It was that feeling when a parent's child uses a swear they heard from somewhere else in a sentence. While the pair were stunned, Midoriya had walked up to Endeavor and aimed a nasty kick to the man's crotch. Todoroki would have laughed if it didn't look so painful. The teen found himself standing with his legs slightly closer together as Endeavor howled. Midoriya just took hold of Todoroki's wrist and began leading the teen down the hall and past the fallen Endeavor. The green-haired teen just gave a smile and waved towards the man. Bye, you nasty, trashy pig's hit. Todoroki covered up a snort. Why did Midoriya have to say such vulgar words with the tone and innocence of a 4- or 5-year-old? He didn't even know that Midoriya was willing to swear. As Todoroki followed Midoriya, the short teen had brought them to an empty waiting room. The two-toned teen watched as his classmates searched around until the green-haired boy found some blankets that were stored away. Midoriya? The short teen seemed to not have heard him, or maybe ignored him. Eventually, a nest made of blankets was formed in the far corner of the waiting room. Todoroki then found himself being pulled towards it and forced to sit in it. You'll need it. Todoroki heard his classmate's soft voice say. What about the matches, dash? Just rest, Todoroki-kun. I'll make sure no one disturbs you. With Midoriya's stern, but caring, gaze, Todoroki knew there was no arguing about this. Midoriya stood guard, even petting Todoroki's colorful hair. Todoroki soon found himself falling into a peaceful sleep he never realized that he needed until now. Is this what it's like to have a friend? Todoroki decided that maybe friends were an okay thing to have. The next time Todoroki woke, it wasn't due to his father shouting about training. It was just some gentle shakes to his shoulder provided by Midoriya. The two-toned teen rubbed the sleep out of his eyes as he tried to tune in to what his classmate was saying. The XT match is Kacchan and Uraraka. I didn't want to just leave you here. Sorry for waking you up. His gaze reached Midoriya's eyes. If you wanted to go watch the match, I'd be fine with it. Besides, I'd like some time to just stay here and think. Midoriya looked at him with hesitance before nodding and leaving the room. Before the short teen closed the door, Todoroki heard a quiet, "Call me if you need me." Once the teen stopped staring at the door his classmate just left through, he pulled out his phone to check his contacts. Of course, Midoriya added his contact information while he was asleep. With a sigh, Todoroki leaned his head against the wall behind him as he stared distantly at the ceiling. Uraraka-san. The brunette turned to see Midoriya enter her waiting room. She flashed the boy a smile, but it was obvious that it was wavering. Will you be all right? You are facing Kacchan after all. Uraraka was trembling from her nerves, doubts, and anxieties. How could someone like her ever beat someone as strong as Bakugo? I don't know if I can win. He's so strong physically, he probably doesn't even need to use his quirk to take me out. Though it would give me better chances. She startled slightly when Midoriya placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Even if it's hopeless, even if the odds are against you, and even if it's clear that you won't win, you still gotta put everything you got into it. That's what this whole event is about. Even if you don't win, at least you can prove to the world that you are strong and capable. I believe in you, Uraraka-san. Don't give up hope because you think you won't win. Win or lose, you still prove something about yourself. Uraraka stared at her friend with wide eyes. Midoriya just gave her a smile. After all, if you don't try, you'll never know the results, right? Midoriya stumbled slightly when Uraraka jumped towards him with a hug. As he patted and rubbed her back comfortingly, he couldn't help himself from thinking how nice it felt to be hugged. Bakugo helped a lot with making up for Midoriya's lack of physical affection that was lost with Inko. The blonde overall wasn't very open with his emotions, so sometimes Midoriya could see his blonde friend feeling awkward about it. That didn't mean that Midoriya didn't appreciate the effort Kacchan put into caring. You should get going, Uraraka-san. It'd be bad to be late for your own match. When the girl pulled away, Midoriya could see that the brunette had cried. Uraraka wiped away the remaining tears before giving a determined expression. Midoriya gave the girl a thumbs up. Here we are with the next match, folks. Both are Class 1A students. Welcome in our explosive blonde, Bakugo Katsuki, and our resident floaty girl, Uraraka Achiko. Present Mike introduced. Bakugo's red gaze honed in on the nervous form of Uraraka. The girl gulped before steeling herself for what was to come. The blonde across from her seemed to grin at the change in attitude. Both contestants were ready to go. Midnight soon raised her hand into the air before quickly swiping it downwards. Start.